After Frieren and her party aided multiple villages across the imperial territory, they crossed paths with a shadow warrior whose lifelong mission was to kill Frieren. Yet she convinced him to abandon that forgotten purpose and move forward. Now, as the Foundation Festival arc begins, a deadly plot against Ciri comes to light, and Frieren's group is tasked with protecting the most powerful mage in the known history. What threat lies ahead, and how will they rise to meet it? Let's find out. The story arc began in a small town visited by Yubel. She knocked on the door of a house, and when it opened, she greeted Land with a cheerful wave, calling him Four Eyes. Land, however, immediately told her to go home before abruptly closing the door in her face. Yubel remarked that he was being mean. She then looked around and asked if this was the village where he had grown up. As she watched the children happily playing outside, she commented that it seemed like such a lovely and peaceful place. She then teased, wondering aloud whether he would let her in or if she should cause a scene right there. From the other side of the door, Land replied that it wouldn't really bother him. He said he wasn't particularly attached to that village anyway. Yubel paused and thought, then asked if that was the case. What was it that he was attached to? Land fell silent and didn't answer. Seeing that, Yubel pressed him to open up to her. Land, clearly annoyed, asked how many times he needed to remind her that his name was Land. Still, because of her persistence, he finally gave in and let her inside. He invited her to sit at the dining table while he prepared something to drink. Land asked what Yubel wanted from him. Yubel, in turn, asked if he wasn't afraid of her. Land seemed puzzled and asked why he would be. Tapping her fingers lightly on the table, Yubel explained that this was simply her analysis. The fact that he had used his clone to participate in a crucial event like the first-class mage exam, she said, could mean that he was afraid to show himself in front of people, that perhaps he felt especially threatened by other talented mages. Land asked if that was really how she saw him. As he handed her a cup of tea, Yubel replied that she saw him in 3 different ways. He could be a coward, someone with bad taste, or perhaps both. She then told Four Eyes to just admit it. Did he enjoy watching terrifying caged beasts from a place of safety? Land then said he wasn't a big fan of people who didn't get straight to the point. But Yubel added that there were no cages there anymore. I see, Land replied. When he offered her sugar, she accepted it. She requested that he add plenty, to which he replied with a polite yes, ma'am. Land then remembered that he had baked some cookies earlier that afternoon and asked if she wanted some. Yubel agreed. As he walked away, Yubel called out to him, and when Land asked what it was, she warned him not to run away from her. He went into another room and replied that he wasn't planning to run anywhere. A few moments later, a thudding noise came from inside, which turned out to be him pulling out a piece of luggage. He said that it was time to run. Then, without hesitation, Land made his escape through the window. As Land walked outside, he wondered to himself what Yubel's purpose could be. Either way, he had no intention of staying in the same house as someone he considered a maniac like her. A short while later, he had already put some distance between them and glanced back toward the village. He hadn't expected to leave that place in such a manner. Maybe, he thought, he should at least say a proper farewell. Following that thought, he made his way to a cemetery and knelt before a gravestone. Suddenly, Yubel appeared behind him, asking whose grave it was. Land was startled. He hadn't expected her to find him there. He was confident in his ability to conceal his mana, so he couldn't understand how she managed to track him down. Yubel approached and said she had simply used her own analysis of him to locate him. Land frowned slightly at her words, saying she didn't understand anything about him at all. Yubel admitted that was true. She didn't, but told him to explain it to her then. After a moment of silence, Land finally spoke. The grave belonged to his grandmother. She had passed away about 5 years ago, back when he was still a third-class mage. She had died peacefully of old age. Both of his parents were already gone, so it had only ever been the 2 of them. She was the one who raised him. Yubel, still curious, wanted to know more, but Land said that was all there was to it. He then explained that his grandmother had once asked him to stay by her side, since she only had a little time left to live. She didn't want to die alone. But truthfully, he found it a nuisance. His magic school had been in the imperial capital at the time, and he hadn't yet mastered controlling his clone with the precision he had now. Despite knowing her remaining days were numbered, his grandmother had still looked after him more than he ever did her. He thought she just wanted to spend what little time she had left together with him. He had been so preoccupied with his own thoughts that by the time he realized it, she was already gone. Because of that, for the past 5 years, he hadn't been able to bring himself to leave that village. And now that he thought about it, maybe she wasn't the only one afraid of being alone. Yubel responded quietly, saying she understood. Lan then asked how much longer it would take before she finally told him the reason she had come there. He warned that if her purpose was to kill him, he would simply run away as fast as he could. Yubel then pulled out a letter and said that she had received news from the Continental Magic Association. Lan asked why she hadn't told him sooner and what the news was about. Yubel began walking away and explained that the association wanted to assign a pair for the next mission. When Lan asked who that pair was, she replied that it was the two of them. Hearing that, Lan said the association had clearly made the wrong choice and asked if he could go home now. Yubel insisted that she didn't think their choice was wrong. She even mentioned that Siri had told her he didn't have to take part if he didn't want to. Still, Yubel declared that it was her intention to bring him along, even if she had to resort to force. Besides, she said she wanted to get to know him better. Lan countered that she was only interested in his magic, but admitted that it was fine. Deep down, he thought maybe he was looking for someone who would pull him away from that place, someone who would drag her out of that village. Yubel then teased him, asking if he was hitting on her. Lan wasn't expecting that and was caught off guard, wondering if that was really how it looks like. When Yubel handed him the letter, she requested that he try to flirt with her more. Lan responded that she should first tell him what the mission was. It had been 31 years since the death of the hero Himmel. The scene then shifted to the Imperial territory, within the Imperial capital of Iceberg. Inside a room were Frieren, Stark, Fern, Sensei, and Falsch, gathered around a large map spread across the table. Sensei stated that it would be a large-scale mission, one that would involve 5 first-class mages. Frieren let out a sigh and sank to her knees, clearly irritated. She complained that ambushing them like that right in front of the castle gate was such a low move. Her original plan had simply been to buy as many magic items as she could during the upcoming Foundation Festival. Besides, she said she had nothing to do with that matter at all, so she didn't care about the mission. Fern grew concerned when she noticed how downhearted Frieren seemed. Then she realized something. The mission required 5 mages, yet she could only see 3 first-class mages in the room, including herself. Falsch explained that the other 2 were Land and Yubel. They were assigned as a team and were already on the move, gathering information for the group. Sensei asked everyone to let her give them a brief overview. As they already knew, Iceberg was currently in the midst of the National Foundation Festival. On the festival's final day, which would take place 3 days from now, a grand ball was scheduled to be held at the palace. Many prominent figures from the Imperial territories and the northern lands would be attending this gathering. Mistress Siri herself had been invited to the event as the official representative of the Continental Magic Association. Frieren asked what exactly the mission was, adding that Sensei shouldn't tell her they were supposed to act as Siri's bodyguards. Sensei replied that that was precisely the case. Falsch then added that he had been informed by Lineal, a first-class mage currently undercover in the Empire, that there was a possible assassination attempt being planned against Mistress Siri during the ball. According to Sensei, they expected to receive more detailed information on the night of the event itself, but for now, they believed the threat to be plausible. Fern looked uneasy after hearing that, admitting she found it hard to believe that such a thing could even be possible. Frieren responded that it would indeed be incredibly challenging. Even for her, she said, she couldn't imagine being able to defeat Siri at all. Without a doubt, Siri stood above all other human mages in their era. If that was the case, Fern asked, why did they need to stay on high alert for such a possibility? Frieren explained that that was only true if the fight was between mages. Then, turning towards Stark, she said that a highly skilled warrior could possibly kill Siri. She pulled Fern aside and demonstrated that from a certain precise distance, it could be done. If Stark were to launch a surprise attack from that range, they wouldn't have enough time to defend themselves. They would be killed instantly, unable to cast a single spell in time. Hearing that, Fern became frightened and instinctively hid behind Frieren. Stark, clearly hurt, pointed out that reacting that way was kind of disheartening. Frieren smiled slightly, and said he doesn't deny that he could. Stark fell silent and said he would just try his best to keep his distance from now on. But Frieren told him he didn't need to do that. Frieren added that she had only been joking and apologized, which made her pat Stark gently on the head. Frieren then explained that when it came to close combat, mages could do very little against warriors. That was why trust between party members was absolutely crucial, and having a warrior was essential. Without someone on the front lines who could face enemies in close combat, mages were far more fragile than they realized. She assumed that the same principle applied even to a great mage like Ciri. Sensei replied that they had, of course, already taken that into account. She and Falsh would act as Ciri's personal bodyguards, since both of them were skilled enough in hand-to-hand combat to hold their own even against warriors. Frieren then turned to Stark and asked if he thought he could take them down. Stark threw the question back at her, saying that from his perspective, they were the ones who could tear him to pieces. Frieren added that if the assassins they were up against were anything like the close combat specialists they had faced before, they would likely stand a better chance by attacking them with spells instead. Stark agreed that they already had a solid plan for dealing with warriors, but Frieren insisted that things only looked that way on the surface. The truth was, she said, they didn't really know what would happen if they were to face a warrior capable of matching their very best. She recalled how they had nearly lost their lives before even making it that far. Sensei, intrigued, asked if she was referring to the Shadow Warrior. The scene then shifted, showing a sword resting neatly atop a cabinet. A barber, busy trimming someone's hair, respectfully addressed the man in the chair as Your Excellency and asked how he wanted his sideburns done. The man replied that he wanted them the same as always, kept unnatural. The barber asked if this was in preparation for a mission, and the man confirmed it was. He said he needed to freshen up a little. As his hair was tied back, the man remarked that his face won't remain in the shadows of history. Still, he added, it would be the last face seen by those on the list. The least he could do was face them with courtesy. A few moments later, the haircut was finished. The man complimented the barber, saying his work was excellent. He had a scar across his face and wore an eye patch over his right eye. Moved by the praise, the barber thanked him, saying it was an honor to be of service. The next scene showed Yubel and Lan together, both dressed as though they were attending a grand formal event. Yubel wore a graceful dress, while Lan, in a neatly fitted tuxedo, offered his arm to escort her. That evening, as they boarded a carriage, Yubel asked if there had been some kind of discord between the Empire and the Continental Magic Association. While extending his hand to help her up, Lan replied that it seemed that way. When she asked why, he admitted he didn't know either. That tension, he said, had existed for a long time, and only those directly involved in the past truly understood the details behind their conflict. Even so, he added, they could infer the reasons to some extent. The Empire stood as the most powerful magical civilization on the continent, possessing the most advanced magical technology and actively employing it for warfare. Because of this, they were naturally secretive. No one really knew what went on behind the scenes. On the other hand, the goal of the Continental Magic Association was to gather the most skilled mages across the land, with all decisions entrusted to the great mage Ciri, a being whose very nature transcended human understanding. There's no knowing what they may bring about it either. Lan then asked Yubel if she thought there was any chance for the two sides to reconcile. Yubel simply answered that both were terrifying in their own way. Their carriage continued down the road. Yubel commented on the sheer number of them. Lan explained that the National Foundation Festival took place during one of the busiest times of the year for the upper class. Nobles from various regions used this opportunity to visit the capital and pay their respects. Every distinguished family aimed to maintain its place among high society, so heavy traffic was inevitable. Yubel remarked that that must be why they had to dress the way they did. Lan confirmed that the invitations had already been verified, but not every regional noble's face was easy to recognize. That, he said, was the conclusion drawn by Lineal, the same first-class mage mentioned by Sensei, currently serving as a spy within the Empire. A few moments later, Lan noted that they were almost at their destination. From the window of the carriage, he could already see the estate coming into view. Yubel explained that their mission was to secretly infiltrate the banquet hosted by one of the Empire's highest-ranking vassals and retrieve the documents related to the assassination plans that Lineal had hidden inside a storage chamber. She asked Land if that approach wasn't a bit roundabout. Couldn't Lineal have just brought the documents directly to them? Land answered that, according to Sensei, Lineal had been working as a spy within the Empire for at least 15 years and had managed to position herself in a way that allowed her access to their internal operations. Yubel nodded in understanding, saying that if that was the case, it made sense that Lineal wouldn't be able to move freely during the National Foundation Festival. She added that she must be quite impressive, even if she didn't seem that way at first glance. Curious, Land asked if she had met her before. Yubel recalled that she had, once, at the Northern Branch. At that time, she was submitting her triennial report. Afterward, she had spent the entire day watching butterflies in the garden. Honestly, she said, the only impression she left on her was that she was a bit of a weirdo. When Land heard that Lineal had spent an entire day observing butterflies, he asked if that didn't also make her a weirdo for watching her do it. Soon after, their carriage arrived at the venue. Land stepped out first and offered his hand to help Yubel down, reminding her to watch her behavior once they were inside. Yubel replied that she had already thought about that on the way there, but still added that it felt rather nice, surprisingly pleasant, even. Land responded that such gestures were common in situations like this, then invited her to head inside. At the entrance, they had no trouble getting in. Land simply presented the invitation, and the attendant immediately allowed them through. Inside the grand hall, Yubel looped her arm around his, which made Land react in mild surprise. But before he could say anything, she told him to look around. All the other pairs there were doing the same thing, and they had to act naturally if they wanted to blend in. After all, they were supposed to be a couple. Land agreed and decided to just let her be. As they walked through the grand hall, Land's hand moved with remarkable speed, so quick that no one around even noticed when he deftly plucked a small pin from the coat of a man they passed by. The theft was seamless and effortless. Moments later, the two began quietly observing their surroundings, searching for the specific room they needed to enter. Land eventually pointed out what he believed to be the one. As he worked on unlocking the door, Yubel realized that this was the storeroom where Lineal had hidden the documents. There wasn't any sign of life nearby, which made it a perfect spot for concealment. After a few seconds, Land finally managed to open the door. He mentioned that the room wasn't currently in use, so there were no guards stationed there. They needed to hurry and find the documents before anyone noticed. But before stepping inside, Land tossed the stolen tag onto the floor outside the door. Yubel asked what he was doing, and he replied that it was insurance, just in case. Better to have it than not, he said. They split up to search the room. But shortly after, Yubel approached him, calling him Four Eyes as she placed a hand on his shoulder. Land turned to her, asking if she had found the documents. She shook her head and said it wasn't that. They were the ones who had been found. Curious, Yubel asked if the estate's guards were particularly skilled. Yubel's hunch proved right when the sound of heavy footsteps echoed closer and closer down the hallway. Land wondered how he hadn't noticed their presence sooner. For them to get that close without detection meant they were no ordinary guards. Yubel concluded that it meant they had no choice but to fight. But Land immediately told her to stop. They should just retreat and escape through the window. He could sense that their opponents were much stronger than expected. Yubel, however, raised her staff with a confident glint in her eyes, saying she was strong too. Land noticed how she almost seemed excited by the situation. Deciding to leave her to her own enthusiasm, he muttered that he'd just run instead. Yet deep down, he knew he was wrong. The difference in power between them and the guards was greater than he'd anticipated. He couldn't just abandon Yubel there. Growing anxious, he reached out and grabbed her by the shoulder. Yubel turned, confused, and asked what his hand was doing there. At that exact moment, the door swung open, and from the guard's point of view, what he saw was a man pinning a woman against the wall in an intimate position. Embarrassed, the guard quickly apologized and shut the door again. With the situation defused in the most unexpected way, Land stood silently, watching the guard turn and walk away. Land realized from a glance that the uniform the guards wore was distinct, one used exclusively by the Empire's Special Forces of Magic. Originally, that unit had been formed to suppress uprisings, but it seemed their duties had long since expanded, now even serving as personal guards to high-ranking dignitaries. Outside the room, one of the guards asked his companion, Kanona, what they should do about what they had just seen. Kanona replied that it was a waste of time to bother. Things like that tended to happen often in places like this, she said, and they should just leave the two alone. After all, the storeroom wasn't even in use. The man, however, wasn't comfortable with that idea. He pointed out that the two inside were mages, and most likely skilled ones at that. Kanona sighed softly and said, My, as she drew her wand. The two positioned themselves by the door, preparing for any sign of movement, but Kanona suddenly told him to wait. She had noticed something. Kneeling down, she picked up a small object from the floor. It was the pin that Land had deliberately left behind. The man recognized it immediately as a badge from the Empire's Academy of Magic. Kanona suggested that it must have fallen from one of the people inside. After all, several highborn children who attended that academy were also present at the ball as guests. If that was the case, the man said, it wasn't surprising that the pair inside were mages. Her companion agreed, saying that made perfect sense. The man then proposed that they speak to the two and confirm their background, but Kanona questioned whether that was really a good idea. If they weren't careful, she warned, they might end up offending them, and interfering with a noble's romantic affairs was no small matter. She recalled one of her colleagues who had once acted on a misguided sense of justice and ended up humiliating a noble in the middle of a ceremony. Now, that same man was stationed as a gatekeeper in the remote northern region of Caston, where he'd spent over a decade staring out at nothing but an endless, empty snowfield. Kanona turned to her fellow guard, Nu, and teasingly asked if he wanted to come visit her there someday. Nu quickly declined, saying it was far too cold a place for a vacation. Inside the storeroom, Land still hadn't moved, leaving Yubel standing awkwardly before finally telling him that it looked like they were in the clear and that he could back off now. Land, still composed, told her not to react like that. He was only acting appropriately given the situation. Without another word, he turned back to the task at hand, saying that what mattered more was finding the documents quickly so they could get out of that place. Yubel kicked him lightly from behind, prompting him to scold her and tell her not to do that. He explained that if those had been ordinary authorities, they would never have dared to lay a hand on highborn children without official approval. No matter how suspicious they might have seemed, if there was even the slightest chance of causing an incident, such people would always choose to protect themselves. However, that didn't apply to the special forces of magic. Not only were they extremely perceptive and sharp, but they were also known for their belligerent nature. Meanwhile, outside, Nu called out to Kanona. She said it seemed they no longer had to worry about any vacation plans. Kanona had noticed that the badge she picked up earlier was bent and crooked, something that happened because of Land's swift movements when he had pulled it from its owner earlier, twisting it slightly in the process. Realizing this, the two guards acted immediately. Without hesitation, they kicked the door open. Nu entered first, wand at the ready, prepared to confront the intruders. But when they got inside, the room was empty. The only thing left was an open window. Kanona's eyes narrowed as she assessed the scene. She told Nu to go after them, reasoning that they couldn't have gotten far. As for her, she would stay and search for any traces left behind. She was curious about what those two were really after. Once she was alone, she paused for a moment, then smiled faintly to herself. She murmured that it seemed there were some interesting mistakes made there today. Elsewhere, the scene shifted to a lively street bustling with merchants calling out to customers and showing off their wares. Among the crowd was Frieren, who had stopped in front of a stall, fascinated by a magical item said to allow the wearer to hear sounds from afar. She asked the shopkeeper if that was really true, and the woman encouraged her to try it herself. Frieren placed the headband on her head, but said she couldn't tell whether it actually worked. Fern reminded her that they were supposed to be on patrol, but Frieren simply handed the headband over to her and told her to give it a try instead. With no choice, Fern put it on and tested it. After a moment, she said she couldn't sense any magical power coming from it, so it was probably fake. Off to the side, Stark watched them silently, prompting Fern to ask what he was staring at. He answered bluntly that the headband actually looked good on her. Caught off guard, Fern blushed slightly and muttered that he was starting to scare her. From the balcony of a large mansion nearby, The nobleman wearing an eye patch sat dining as one of his attendants observed outside through a telescope. The attendant commented that the view below was quite charming and asked if His Excellency agreed. Through the lens, what he was watching were Frieren, Fern, and Stark interacting casually below. Frieren walked back toward the two, joining in their light-hearted banter. The man with the eye patch murmured that he wanted to say she was full of openings, yet there was something uncanny about her. It's almost as if he was being told to obediently reveal his true self. As he continued to watch, Frieren suddenly looked directly toward the telescope, locking eyes with him. The man stiffened slightly, unsettled by the sensation. It felt as though their gazes had met despite the distance. "What tremendous power," the nobleman commented. The attendant helped him put on his coat and asked whether he believed this woman might interfere with their operation. The man with the eye patch replied by turning the question back to him. While buttoning his coat, he added that, in the face of their great purpose, the assassination of Siri, such concerns were trivial. Still, he admitted that perhaps they hadn't been careful enough, calling the attendant old man. As he left, he handed an envelope to a waiter and told him to keep the change. Climbing into his carriage, he reflected that the shadows had their own way of fighting. After all, there was no need for beauty and victories that would never be recorded in history. Like the spirits of noble warriors, they had no choice but to cast aside all pride and honor in order to seize success. The scene then showed Land and Yubel walking through a narrow alley somewhere. Yubel asked where they were, noting that not a single soul seemed to pass through that area. As he glanced around, Land said they were near the old Imperial Plaza. That entire region, he added, had been turned into a no-entry zone due to the land readjustment project. While following behind, Yubel grew curious and asked if there was a chance they'd get cornered there. Land pulled a wooden board aside and replied that it was a rhetorical question. And in his opinion, there was nowhere left for them to run at this point. From a very high vantage point, Nu, the one assigned to follow them, quietly watched their every move and trailed behind. Yubel, once again calling Land Four Eyes, said she knew he was the prudent type, and also knew he would try to help her escape. Land didn't answer right away, too focused on what he was doing. "Is that right?" he eventually responded while climbing through a window. "In that case," he added, "Yubel better remember that he absolutely hates unnecessary conversations." Yubel was about to answer back, but Land asked whether he should just flat out tell her to shut up to help it sink into that thick skull of hers. Still, Land helped her up through the window. She then mentioned that she wasn't born in the Empire, so she didn't know much about the Empire's special forces of magic. So he better explain it clearly, or else she wouldn't be scared of them the way she should. Hearing that, Land looked at her for a moment before explaining that the special forces of magic were elite units of the Imperial Army made up of mages. Yubel then asked him to dumb it down even further. And so, Land clarified, they're the strongest mages in the Empire. As she followed behind, Yubel asked why someone like them, a first-class mage, should be afraid of them. Land admitted that when it comes to first-class mages, it wasn't an exaggeration to say they were the most powerful magic users on the continent, especially within the Empire. However, first-class mages are still just mages, and that alone already makes a poor match. He went on to explain that for a long time, the Empire had actively used magic in its military operations. In other words, they had been building armies of mages trained specifically for warfare for quite a while. Those folk, and he wasn't speaking metaphorically, had the kind of power that could bring down an entire nation. Yubel responded with a quiet acknowledgement, saying that if a rebellion were ever to break out, it would certainly spell trouble. The Shadow Warriors and the Holy Wand Court. Land went on to explain that there were already countless rumors circulating about the Empire's hidden military agencies, organizations said to specialize in countering magic to prevent uprisings. Among those officially recognized by the Empire, he said, was the Special Forces of Magic, a unit tasked with suppressing insurrections. Yubel thought that such a force likely existed to serve as a visible deterrent, but Land viewed it differently. To him, it was more accurate to see it as a strategic advantage, an organization stationed at the forefront, trained specifically to deal with mages. The Special Forces of Magic also functioned as a division of the Empire's national defense. After all, it was nearly impossible to wage war without mages. Whether it was rebellion or open war, against humans or demons, The special forces were dogs trained to hunt mages with precision and expertise. As they talked, Nu was shown walking into the area. Yubel sensed a sudden surge of hostility from Land, prompting him to ask how she could tell. She said that from the way Land spoke, it was as if he himself had once been persecuted. Land fell silent at her words, his expression darkening as an old memory surfaced. He recalled being a child, hiding behind a cabinet while a member of the Special Forces of Magic paid a visit to their home. His grandmother had faced her calmly, prepared for whatever would come. Yet, in the end, she had left without incident, sparing them both. Returning to the present, Land admitted that Yubel was right, because at that very moment, they were being persecuted. Before Yubel could respond, a massive building suddenly collapsed toward their position. In an instant, Land vanished from sight, seemingly crushed beneath the falling structure, while Yubel didn't even flinch or step back. She was only surprised by how suddenly Land had disappeared. Then she turned toward their assailant and said that it seemed this wasn't something they could just talk their way out of. Nu revealed the overwhelming extent of his power. With effortless control, he had sliced through several large buildings and suspended them mid-air, as though they were weightless. Using a baton-like weapon, he manipulated the debris with precise, fluid movements, his gaze fixed on Yubel, who now faced the direction where the building had fallen. She called out to the one she referred to as Four Eyes, asking if he was still alive. Yubel assessed the situation, concluding that the ability Nu had used resembled telekinesis, based on the nature of the magical energy involved. She assumed it was a typical gravity-based attack. While the sheer range of the spell was impressive, what caught her attention more was the extraordinary speed with which it had been controlled. She knocked against the fallen building's surface, thinking that even someone like Four Eyes, who specialized in mana detection, hadn't managed to react in time. Even she herself hadn't sensed anything until the very moment of impact, meaning this was no ordinary spell. Nu, surprised to hear her say about talking it out, said that's truly not a good impression to give off. He explained that he had already issued several warnings for the fugitives to surrender, but they had chosen to ignore them. Yubel then realized what those annoying mana signals earlier must have been, warnings. She spoke toward where Land had last been and told him that he really should have been more diligent in alerting her about important details like that. Nu, hearing her words, realized that she wasn't from the Empire. That, he said, was good to know. Yubel looked puzzled at the remark. Nu went on to clarify verbally that she should surrender now, or he would be forced to subdue her with strength. Still receiving no response from Land, Yubel asked aloud if he was really all right. When silence continued, she gave a small, amused smile and said that perhaps he had already fled. In the next instant, her form blurred, vanishing from where she stood and reappearing directly in front of Nu. Reacting quickly, Nu raised a wall made from the surrounding debris to block her, but Yubel effortlessly sliced through the massive slabs of stone with her magic. Her eyes gleamed as she licked her lips in anticipation, remarking that this meant she was free to do whatever she wanted. Seeing her expression, Nu understood what she was, bloodthirsty. It had been quite some time since he had encountered resistance like this. Declaring that it was time to begin the suppression, he unleashed his magic once again. The surrounding buildings shattered violently, fragments swirling in the air as Nu manipulated them into deadly projectiles aimed directly at her. But Yubel moved swiftly, darting through the chaos and ascending high into the air. While airborne, she observed carefully, her analytical mind racing. Something felt off. She couldn't quite pinpoint why, but there was a faint gap, an inconsistency, between Nu's telekinesis and the flow of his mana. Perhaps, she thought, that was the reason Land had misread the timing of the earlier impact. Nu continued his relentless assault, but she knew that as long as she could keep dodging through sight and reaction, she could fight without much trouble. Even so, she still couldn't identify the defining nature of his magic. While evading, she thought to herself that although it was undeniably fascinating, once she managed to grasp its true mechanism, it might already be too late. She would have been caught by then. That was the feeling she got from it. So she decided that instead of continuing to dodge endlessly, she would finish this quickly before she had the chance to overanalyze it. Turning toward him, she invoked a spell, Target Binding Magic, Salgani, a type of magic designed to restrain and immobilize its target. Immediately, The magic that had been holding the suspended buildings dissipated, causing everything new had lifted to come crashing down to the ground. The spell prevented its target from using magic altogether. Nu's composure faltered as he felt his control slip away. He could no longer manipulate his mana. This was clearly a powerful restraint-type spell. He grew curious about its activation condition, wondering what kind of trigger it required. Yubel began to approach him and asked what he thought they are. But just as she prepared to strike, she noticed something. Her attack stopped midway when Nu suddenly broke free from her binding spell. In a split second, he hurled a massive fragment of a building at her with tremendous force. Nu realized that he could move again, and from that, he understood something crucial. Yubel managed to protect herself in time, escaping the attack without a single scratch. Yubel was astonished. In her mind, it made no sense. He had just launched a counterattack when he should have been completely unable to cast a spell. That wasn't supposed to be possible. Meanwhile, he quickly began formulating hypotheses about the potential conditions of her magic. He reasoned that it might rely either on keeping the target within her direct line of sight or maintaining contact with them through mana detection. One of the two, he thought, must be the key. That was the closest explanation he could arrive at. But Yubel had already reappeared behind him, moving in for another strike. Nu, calm and analytical, said that now that he knew this much, it no longer mattered which of those theories was correct. He activated another spell, and at once, Yubel's view of him began to fade. His figure gradually vanished from sight. Her movements stopped abruptly, and she dropped to the ground. As she rose again, she was alarmed to realize she could no longer see. Even her mana detection had been disrupted. Alarmed, she demanded to know if this was his doing, asking what he had just done to her. Nu, standing nearby yet unseen, replied evenly that he had finally succeeded in suppressing a suspect. Nu asked if the other was concealing himself nearby, saying his job would be easier if that person would just come out and rescue her. Yubel only smiled and asked why he thinks she turned violent. She suggested the other person might have been gone long ago, terrified of the special forces of magic. She wondered about what kinds of evil deeds such forces might commit. Nu noticed something and warned that she should stop trying to buy time. His companion, he said, was still close and likely waiting for an opening to strike. Hearing that, Yubel brightened at the thought that Land had not abandoned her after all, even though he easily could have done so earlier. She sprang to her feet, grabbing her staff and lunging for Nu's head to slash, but he dodged so quickly that only his hat was cut. That reminded Yubel that, cowardly and poor as his personality might be, Land hated turning his back on people above all else. She charged toward where Nu was while he responded by throwing jagged shards from ruined buildings at her. She sliced through each piece cleanly without effort. Nu then hurled a circular chunk like a stone that knocked her staff from her hand. Even though her weapon flew away, she did not hesitate. She closed the distance and grappled with Nu, grabbing his collar and seizing the baton in his right hand. She spat that Four Eyes really was twisted and disgusting. Nu was surprised she could do this despite being effectively blinded. While holding him, Yubel called to Land that she has created an opening. Given Land's skill, she said, he could blow that man's head apart without trouble. Nu then said he was unwilling to sound like a coward saying something like that, but he told them to stop hiding and surrender immediately. He warned that any foolish move and he would kill the woman. Watching the battlefield, he was sure he knew this matter had been concluded from the start and that it was already too late to salvage the situation. He said he would be held responsible if the woman died. Nearby, Land stood behind a ruined wall and listened, concealed yet observing every move. Nu began counting down from 3 while Yubel, still restrained, called out a warning to the one she referred to as Four Eyes. But before the tension could escalate, Land finally surrendered and stepped out, apologizing to Yubel as he did. He said he couldn't risk making things worse. And with that, the battle between the two sides came to an end. Both Land and Yubel were restrained, their hands bound, and they were taken away and loaded into a carriage. Nu was later seen holding a small vial that contained something glowing. He slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat. One of his subordinates commented that cleaning up after this mess would be a nightmare, and that Vice Captain Kanona would probably lose her temper because of it. Nu, however, replied that as long as she accomplishes a remarkable deed, she wouldn't be angry. Looking up at a nearby streetlight, He noted that not even a scratch had been left on it. He remarked how peculiar that standard was. Then, turning to another subordinate named Weg, he asked if he thought it was possible to split a stone into multiple pieces. Weg said he wasn't sure, but in his home village there was a quarry where people cut and extracted stone all the time. Nu approached the carriage and remarked that she must have witnessed something similar earlier. He knocked on the door and told them not to act violently. Even if they tried, he said, the wagon wouldn't be damaged. It was made of iron, just like the rope binding their wrists. Land replied sarcastically that he was so kind. Soon after, the carriage set off, carrying the two captives through the dimly lit streets. During the ride, Land told Yubel that their restraints were made of iron. When he asked her what she thought of that, she threw the question back at him. Realizing she wasn't facing him, he began to suspect she might still be blind. Yubel told him to just explain it himself. Land said the restraints were rope, not metal. He could tell by the way they felt against his wrists. When he mentioned the phrase "how it feels," Yubel leaned her body slightly against his and thought aloud that was, in fact, possible. A faint smile curved her lips as she confirmed her suspicion. Land was in his real body this time. Land explained that creating a doppelganger required preparation, and he hadn't had time for that. He never expected to get crushed by a building instantly after all. Yubel agreed with a soft nod before closing her eyes for a moment, only to suddenly headbutt him under the chin, making him flinch in pain. She then asked why he hadn't attacked even when they had been so close to winning. Land, caught off guard by the question, answered that was just her interpretation. That man, he said, had been seriously inclined to kill her, and he had no doubt about that. Yubel, though frustrated, didn't argue further and accepted his reasoning since he'd said it himself. Land added that Yubel had probably thought it would be fine even if they both went down together. His words made her pause in silence until he followed up by asking why she treated her own life and the lives of others with such disregard. If she hadn't chosen to fight, he said, the two of them might have escaped. Yubel called him Four Eyes again, prompting him to ask what. She smiled faintly and said it was probably because, in the end, he didn't seem to want her to die. Land sighed and replied that maybe he should have just attacked after all. The scene shifted to another location where Falsh and Sensei were in the middle of a discussion. Sensei was in disbelief upon hearing that Land and Yubel still hadn't returned. Falsh reported that they had discovered traces of a battle that had taken place in the old Empire Plaza. It appeared there had been interference from the Special Forces of Magic. Sensei frowned, wondering why the Special Forces would even be in the Imperial capital. Falsh admitted that that was all he knew for now. However, Sensei pointed out that the situation didn't match the intelligence they had received earlier from Lineal. Normally, the Special Forces of Magic were occupied with border patrol. And with the National Foundation Festival currently underway, no military forces were supposed to be deployed within the borders. The Special Forces of Magic, in particular, shouldn't have been able to move freely. That, she said, was the reason the delivery of their intel had ended up the way it did. Falsh added that for some unknown reason, the National Defense Forces had started mobilizing their troops around the Imperial capital. Sensei brushed it off with a sigh, saying that whatever the case, it was likely that the two had already been captured. She turned away from him and asked if they should attempt to rescue them, noting that she could proudly claim to be Yubel's senior. Falsh was in disbelief, surprised that she was actually concerned about something so ridiculous. Still, he said the situation would not end peacefully. The Special Forces of Magic, after all, harbored deep resentment towards Sensei, to the point that they could still remember her face. Hearing that, Sensei seemed both puzzled and offended. She said it was upsetting, especially since, unlike them, she hadn't even killed a single one of their people. Falsh replied that if things had already escalated that far, then naturally, Lineal would be the one to take responsibility for them. For now, he said, they should simply observe. It would be better to minimize any conflicts before Ciri's arrival in 3 days. Surely, he said, she could agree with that. Falsh added that if Lineal were to handle it, it may be resolved peacefully. Sensei wasn't entirely convinced. She said that Lineal was the type of woman who avoided trouble whenever possible, and when cornered, always acted to protect herself. That had always been her nature. Falsh sighed, saying that as expected, those two never seemed to get along. Sensei straightened, taking a stance as though preparing for a fight. and declared that the next time she saw Lineal, she would beat her up. Falsh could only respond that, for now, they should just wait. Inwardly, he wondered when those two would ever stop quarreling every time they met. Back outside among the lively festival stalls, Frieren still hadn't finished shopping. She placed a bear-shaped headband on Fern's head, then spotted another one, and insisted she try the rabbit design too. Fern's expression, however, clearly showed that she was exhausted. Frieren remarked that they'd been seeing those headbands all over different shops and wondered aloud if they were the current trend in the area. Meanwhile, off to the side, Stark was preoccupied examining the weapons on display. Fern reminded Frieren that she had already said they were supposed to be on patrol and pleaded with her to take things seriously for once. She added that she understood Frieren wasn't particularly interested in the assignment. But before she could finish, Frieren interrupted her, saying that she believed this relaxed atmosphere was exactly what created openings. Ever since they had entered the imperial capital, she said, she had felt as though they were being watched. Yet, her mana detection hadn't picked up anything at all, which, she admitted, was deeply unsettling. As they continued walking, Frieren explained that she could feel as though they were standing right in the dead center of enemy territory. However, the other party didn't seem to have any intention of attacking them anytime soon. So for now, she concluded, their only option was to proceed carefully while discreetly observing the situation. They eventually stopped when they came across a large statue standing prominently in the plaza's center. Fresh flowers hung gracefully around it. Stark guessed that it must be a statue of Flam, since they had seen several similar monuments throughout the imperial capital. Frieren wasn't surprised. Flam, after all, was the founder of magic for humankind, the heroine who had granted the Empire the wisdom of magic 1,000 years ago. Without the great mage Flam, the Empire might never have developed as it had. The National Foundation Festival, she added, was held as a celebration to honor the great achievements of her master. Fern, intrigued, asked if the ornate decorations were also crafted through magic. They were so beautiful that she couldn't help but wonder. Frieren commented that it was indeed exciting to see so many different kinds of magic at work, and Fern agreed wholeheartedly. As they resumed walking, Frieren said the nation was truly remarkable for being so deeply intertwined with magic. Even many ordinary citizens who weren't mages could still use magic skillfully. Because of that, progress came quickly, and the invention of new, curious devices had become easy. However, as expected, the focus of most of their spells was on practical, everyday magic designed for civilian use. Magic had become so ingrained in their culture that it was now part of daily life for both young and old. As they walked, they even saw children playing by levitating small stones with simple spells. Later, they sat together on a bench and watched as fireworks lit up the night sky. Frieren remarked that they were living in an age where humanity as a whole could wield magic. This nation, she said, was the closest realization of the ideal world her master had once dreamed of. Stark commented that it was truly an impressive sight, while Fern added that it was amazing to see for herself that so many different kinds of magic really did exist. As they lingered in the plaza, Stark noticed that the night had grown exceptionally cold. Each breath he exhaled came out as a visible cloud, and soon he was shivering uncontrollably. Fern, noticing this, grew worried. Stark then asked if there was any room left under the blanket they had brought. She unfolded it to show him. Frieren, meanwhile, stared quietly into the distance, deep in thought. She wondered aloud what exactly the plan to assassinate Ciri might entail. A plan couldn't truly be called a plan, she mused, unless there was at least some chance of success. That meant someone out there must have already envisioned Ciri's death in detail. She pondered how powerful such a person, or group, must be, and what kind of magic they were capable of wielding. In her mind, the real enemy of Ciri was not any one person, but the entire magical civilization of the Empire itself. Fern called out to her, but Frieren continued speaking, saying that she had witnessed so many things change over the centuries. She used to laugh at how inevitable those changes were, the way her master's image had gradually shifted over time, how counterfeit grimoires had spread across the lands, and how she had become little more than a legend. But this time, she said, it wasn't something she could laugh about. Frieren stood up and walked toward the edge of the overlook, gazing down at the glowing city below. She admitted softly that she disliked being drawn into a duty like this, and she knew that it was equally unusual for Siri to do something like this, gathering all her disciples together to protect herself. Perhaps, Frieren thought, Siri was hesitant about something too. The scene then cut to Siri herself, sitting in a carriage with her legs crossed. With a calm motion of her hand, she conjured a delicate flower out of thin air using magic and gazed at it in silence. Back with Frieren, she brushed off her thoughts with a quiet never mind, saying that she was probably just overthinking. That woman, she said, was someone who always sought the advancement of magic above all else. Frieren was certain Siri truly believed this was an opportunity for her disciples to gain combat experience. When she turned back toward Fern and Stark, she realized that the two were now sharing their blanket, pressed closely together to keep warm. Frieren smiled faintly and apologized, commenting that they were probably freezing by now. She then suggested that they do one more round of patrol before returning to base. The scene then shifted. Outside, a woman sat at a small table, quietly drinking by herself. The barkeeper called out to her, saying he was about to close up for the night. The woman, addressing him as Master Barkeeper, asked if it would be all right for her to stay just a little longer. He replied that if she wanted to spend more time there, she should come earlier next time. Still, he told her she had probably drunk enough for the evening. She had been drinking all night, after all. The woman explained that she had been working the entire day right up until now. The barkeeper nodded and remarked that given the ongoing National Foundation Festival, her work as a mercenary must have been especially tough. The woman said that was exactly why she wanted to have one last drink before calling it a night. As he stepped inside, the barkeeper asked if she ever thought she might be drinking too much. She said that was her decision to make. The right to interrupt that serene moment after work, she added, wasn't something even the goddess herself could have. But the barkeeper countered that he had every right to do so, since she still hadn't paid her tab. He shut the door behind her and told her to go home once she was done. The woman smiled faintly before taking another sip. Moments later, someone called her attention. She turned toward the street, where a carriage had pulled up beside her. Inside was the nobleman wearing an eye patch. He said he wished to ask for directions. The woman stood up, asking if he really thought she could help with that. It surprised her to see a nobleman, someone who looked every bit like a governor, showing up this late at night in a place like that. He motioned for her to come closer. She opened the carriage door and he handed her a folded piece of paper. He addressed her as a shadow warrior and told her that she had a mission. She was to deliver the message to everyone and burn it after reading. The woman took the paper, unfolded it, and began to read. The man added that she should control her drinking or her swordsmanship would soon grow dull. She apologized, addressing him as governor, and explained that if she didn't drink, her hands would start trembling, and she wouldn't even be able to hold her blade properly to begin with. The man sighed and said it seemed he had made the mistake of asking directions from a drunkard. She just said he should leave the matter to them. After all, the imperial capital was practically their own garden. But before proceeding with the new assignment, she needed to ask for his alias. For the success of their mission, she said, everyone involved was required to have one, along with details such as marital status. They, too, would share theirs in return. Introducing himself, the nobleman revealed that he was the Governor-General of the Empire's northernmost territory, Lorbeer, and that his name was Luva. Upon hearing this, the woman straightened and addressed him respectfully as Your Excellency, realizing she should have called him Governor-General. She apologized for her earlier impoliteness, then told him that her alias was Shrit, a humble mercenary by profession. After their exchange, Shrit returned to the bar and immediately burned the paper Luva had given her. Inside, the barkeeper was still tidying up. He was revealed to be Wolf, her comrade. When Shrit shared what was written on the paper, Wolf remarked that this was their mission, finally, after a long time. He wondered aloud if he was still up for it, admitting he might have grown rusty. Shrit chuckled at that and said his joke is already killing her. Behind Wolf hung a set of bow and arrows. Shrit pointed out that among all of them, the master barkeeper probably still had the highest kill count. A short while later, Wolf stepped outside and made his way to a nearby liquor shop, where he met the poster girl Iris, another member of their network. He passed along the same information to her. After the transaction, Iris left to meet the librarian Routine, to whom she delivered the message next. She proceeded to a church, where she met a priest who handed her a book. Inside the church, the priest crossed paths with a nun and discreetly passed the same information to her. The priest's name was Clematis, the nun's alias was Lore. Moments later, Lore went outside to distribute free food. She ladled a bowl of soup and handed it to a vagrant named Valros, another operative. After eating, Valros headed to a stall and began panhandling. The stall owner grumbled that he was blocking customers and told him to move along. Valros replied that that was precisely why he was there. The man muttered, calling him a stinking old man, but still handed him a few coins. With the exchange complete and the message passed, Valros left. Gazelle, realizing they had been assigned a mission, sighed irritably, clearly annoyed by the trouble ahead. Meanwhile, Frieren, Fern, and Stark were still patrolling the bustling market streets. Frieren stood before a stall, carefully debating what to buy, while Fern grew visibly irritated by how long she was taking to decide. Valros happened to walk past them from behind, catching Frieren's attention. Fern turned and spoke to her, asking about her purchases. Was her intention to lower the enemy's alertness through that? Frieren replied that she was correct. Fern, maintaining her sharp tone, told her to look her in the eye when talking to her. The next morning, Frieren was the first to wake. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the capital, an elderly man leaning on a cane, Glock, was walking just behind Kanona. He remarked that even this early in the morning, the streets were unusually noisy. Kanona replied that it was because the imperial capital, at this hour, before she could finish, Glock completed the thought for her, saying it was because of the ongoing National Foundation Festival. He said he already knew that, and that it actually felt quite pleasant not having to face the troublesome high society crowd for once. Kanona escorted him into what looked like an interrogation room. Once Glock sat at the table, Kanona hung her coat and hat neatly on the side. Glock commented that she's a new face for the usual investigation, then asked who she was. Kanona introduced herself as Kanona of the Special Forces of Magic. Glock's eyes fell on the insignia pinned to her uniform and realized that she was the vice captain. He smirked slightly, saying that it seemed he was going to receive quite the spectacular treatment today. He then asked if they now considered him a traitor. Kanona took her seat, called him by name, and told him he only needed to say one sentence, that he had been deceived by Mocked. Glock fell silent for a moment at that. Kanona continued, saying that if he truly had conspired with a demon, then there was nothing left the Emperor could do but hand down a merciless sentence. Glock calmly asked if, in that case, he would be granted an honorable death like the other nobles. With measured respect, Kanona replied that for a man renowned for purging corruption and evil from the fortified city of Weiss, His Majesty would not wish to act in any way that might tarnish that sense of duty. Glock gave a dry chuckle and asked if that was really what he thought. He then added that he wasn't ready to dine in hell just yet, causing Kanona to pause at his words. He went on, saying that if they were to execute him, they should at least make it grand. Evil, after all, deserved a proper judgment. And besides, he wasn't the only one who achieved that victory. It was a triumph he had shared with Mocked, something Kanona knew. When she called his name again, he pleaded with him. He thought for a moment, then asked who was really pulling the strings behind all of this. Glock mentioned Denkin and asked if it was the Imperial Mage. But then he shook his head, saying that couldn't be. Denkin knew he was someone who despised corruption and evil. That meant, Glock reasoned, the person pulling the strings must be someone else, someone with personal motives tied to Denkin's movements. I see, he muttered, realizing why the investigation had been stretched all the way into the National Foundation Festival. To him, it felt as though he'd been caught up in a political storm. He then asked what they were planning Denkin to accomplish by taking him hostage, or whether there was something to be worried about if Denkin chose to act now. Finally, he sighed and said that, in any case, it wasn't his place to decide. Kanona could do whatever she pleased with him. Kanona reached into her coat pocket and stood, offering Glock a cigarette. She said she wasn't sure if it would suit his taste or not. Glock gave a faint chuckle and commented that her thoughtfulness was extraordinary. He hadn't asked for such a courtesy, yet here she was offering it. Still, he accepted the cigarette as Kanona struck a match to light it for him. But Glock said there was no need. He would do it himself. He lit the cigarette calmly while Kanona returned to her seat. After a quiet puff, Glock noted that Kanona herself didn't seem to smoke. She replied that it was her captain who enjoyed them, so she always kept some on hand. "I see," Glock murmured, exhaling a trail of smoke. He remarked that the scent of that cigarette was familiar. He had smelled the same one not too long ago. Yet, to people like them, that same scent might have lingered for half a century. He then asked, with mild curiosity, who the current captain of the Special Forces of Magic was. Kanona stayed silent and listened. "I see," Glock said again after a moment. "It must be Phrase. In that case, he was not surprised she's her superior now. So the little girl finally became captain," he said. He can truly feel the passage of time. His mind drifted back to a memory. He remembered the day a carriage arrived at the fortified city of Weiss. A young woman stepped out, and it was Phrase. From his position on the balcony, Glock watched her with quiet curiosity. As he made his way down the hall to meet her, Mocht approached and asked bluntly whether he should just kill her right there. The question startled Glock. That was the first time Mocht had ever suggested killing someone outright. Glock told him it was only an inspection and that he should instead prepare a sufficient smokescreen. He asked Mocht if he didn't trust him. Mocht answered that the girl possessed enough power to annihilate the entire fortified city of Weiss. That wasn't the kind of person one sent as an envoy, he said, and he was certain there was another motive behind her arrival. Glock replied that perhaps that was the supposed sin of treason, but it didn't sound all that severe to him. Mocht smiled faintly and said Glock was joking too much. Then, looking straight at him, he added that if it came down to it, he could face that girl himself. He asked for Glock's permission to fight her if necessary. Glock sighed, saying he had no understanding of politics whatsoever. If the Empire became their enemy, they would never survive. But Mocht declared that any who stood against Weiss would be eradicated. "Phenomenal," Glock had said. "That sounds exciting enough," but he said they should just pray it doesn't come to that. Returning to the present, Glock said that in the end, he had made the unfortunate decision for them to investigate each other's motives. Ultimately, that only revealed him that she was truly troublesome and difficult scoundrel. The scene shifted back to the past when Phrase visited him in his office. Glock had been waiting for her there, and the two sat down for a private talk. Now, reflecting on it, Glock admitted that he regretted that decision. Had he known things would turn out the way they did, he said he would have sent Mocht to kill her back then. He added that she herself had been deceived by the schemes of that sly fox. He was certain she had been carrying many burdens in silence, and if she had ever been willing to share them, he would have gladly offered his advice. Still, she said, the sympathy he was now showing was already more than enough. She then stood and continued, saying that according to the report, the court had taken into account mitigating circumstances. If he truly wished to atone for his crimes, he would have to fulfill his duties as the feudal lord of the fortified city of Weiss until the very last moment of his life. That was the emperor's order. Kanona put her hat back on and replied that she believed it wasn't too late for him to dine in hell after all this was over. Furthermore, the peace that Weiss now enjoyed, she added, was born of his shared victory. Glock frowned and asked what she could possibly know about that. Kanona apologized for her insolence, then opened the door and let him out of the room. As they walked down the corridor, Glock remarked that he didn't know what they were planning to do in the imperial capital, but he prayed they wouldn't take the seat for himself in hell. After their conversation, the scene transitioned to a vast, elegant library within the imperial capital. Kanona arrived there to meet with Denkin. As she called out to him, Denkin said that he had already received the report. He commented that the punishment handed down to await judgment in Weiss was surprisingly lenient. Descending the steps, Denkin added that he was certain his father-in-law would have desired a proper sentence. He went on to say that Kanona had already done more than enough for them. As they walked together, he told her that his father-in-law would be transferred to the fortified city of Weiss by noon, and that he would personally accompany him. If there was any consolation in all this, he said, it was that they would no longer have to show their faces among high society. Such gatherings, he added, only brought unnecessary trouble. Kanona replied that Glock had felt exactly the same way about such affairs. Denkin paused for a moment, as though reflecting, then asked what kind of plot the special forces were scheming this time. Kanona politely suggested that he ask Captain Phrase directly. Denkin shook his head and said he was asking her precisely because doing so would loosen his grip on Phrase's reins if he questioned her directly. He urged Kanona to tell him the details of her mission, the true assignment that had been issued to her. Kanona answered respectfully that she did not believe she had the authority to disclose that information. Hearing her response, Denkin smirked and commented that her answer was strangely intriguing. Perhaps it was a top-secret matter, either tied to the special forces of magic or something else entirely. Before he could continue, their conversation was interrupted when Nu arrived to deliver a report. Kanona quickly told Nu that he was being rude to Denkin and that the report could wait until later. Still, Nu went on to state that the two mages from before had already been apprehended. Upon hearing this, Kanona immediately apologized to Denkin for the interruption, explaining that there seemed to be an urgent matter that required her return to headquarters. As she turned to leave, she told him to be careful, adding that he should be more concerned about Glock's well-being. When they had gone, Denkin sighed and muttered, "Good riddance." The people of the Imperial capital, and those in the Continental Magic Association as well, always acted in secret, doing whatever they pleased without ever telling him anything. Still, given his current position, he understood that it was only natural for none of them to trust him. He decided that he should start preparing early, even though he had hoped to leave much sooner. The scene then shifted to the lodge where Frieren and her companions were staying. Frieren, smiling brightly, greeted Fern with a cheerful good morning. For the day, she said, they would be looking for magical items, which she meant they would be patrolling again. Still half asleep, Fern returned the greeting but was startled to see that Frieren was already fully dressed and ready to go. Not only that, her hair was neatly tied up. Frieren proudly said that it had been a piece of cake. Fern, surprised, covered her mouth in disbelief and wondered aloud if breakfast had already been prepared too. Frieren admitted that she hadn't gotten that far yet and told Fern to feed her instead. Moments later, they were downstairs in the kitchen, with Fern spoon-feeding Frieren while Stark stood behind them, massaging Frieren's shoulders. Falsh, meanwhile, was busy cooking their breakfast. When Sensei came down, still groggy from sleep, she stopped mid-step and asked what on earth was going on. Fern explained that Frieren had simply woken up early. Sensei blinked, sat down, and asked if that was supposed to be impressive. She was calmly eating bread while reading a book. Falsh, who was serving tea, scolded her not to read while eating. Stark commented that this was earth-shattering, joking that a major catastrophe would surely happen tomorrow. Sensei sighed, clearly baffled, and muttered that she couldn't understand what was wrong with these people. Meanwhile, Land and Yubel remained bound in shackles as they rode in the carriage toward their destination. When they finally arrived, Weg escorted them to the room where they would be detained. Once inside, he ordered them to show their hands so he could inspect the restraints. After confirming that everything was secure, he left them alone, reminding them not to cause any pointless trouble. Land dryly asked if they really looked like the type to start trouble in their current condition, while Yubel simply sat down quietly near the wall. In her mind, she noted that she still couldn't see, and her mana detection remained completely inactive. There was no sign of any mental interference either, yet somehow it didn't feel like her vision was truly gone. She suspected that, in essence, she might still be seeing things physically but unable to recognize them properly. That, she thought, was what it felt like. She wondered if the internal regulation of her mana had been disrupted. If that were the case, it made sense that she couldn't trigger mana detection. Across from her, Land sat in silence, his expression serious. Yubel thought to herself that, essentially, the spell cast upon her must have restricted one of her senses. Thinking back on Nu's telekinesis, she reflected that although it was powerful, it didn't seem like anything extraordinary. The spell itself didn't strike her as unique. It was the execution that intrigued her. The real question was how Nu had managed to pull it off so flawlessly. That, she realized, was the most crucial part. Still, she admitted to herself that overanalyzing it now would be a waste of time. She decided she might as well leave that puzzle for Four Eyes to solve later. Everything had grown more complicated than she expected, after all. Replaying the events of the battle in her mind, especially when she had charged at Nu while he was restrained, she suddenly felt that maybe things weren't as complex as she had thought. But before she could complete her train of thought, the realization slipped away. Land, meanwhile, remained still, studying the situation carefully. As expected, he was unable to cast any spells. He didn't know the exact composition of the effect restraining them. but it was safe to assume that it originated from the enchanted rope binding their wrists. He had been searching for an opportunity to escape ever since, but his options were limited without the freedom to use magic. Even if Yubel knew the rope could be severed, it would be meaningless if she couldn't use spells like Railsidon or the nigh unstoppable cutter. Then, a thought struck him. Something about the rope's effect reminded him of a previous encounter. During the first-class mage exam, Yubel had annihilated Sensei's clone. Despite the complexity of Sensei's defensive technique, she had completely disregarded the magical effect originating from her hair back then and used her nigh unstoppable cutter spell to slice through it. The overwhelming force of her murderous intent had been stronger than any defensive magic he had ever known, sharper even than the standard offensive spell Soul Track. Yet Yubel had treated that same hair as nothing more than an ordinary thread and had cut through it as easily as paper. From that realization, Land concluded that the rope binding them must be similar in principle. If that were the case, then theoretically, it could also be severed. However, the causal relationship would clearly be distorted. To begin with, she couldn't even cast magic right now, but if Yubel could somehow nullify that restriction, then maybe it was possible. Still, he couldn't quite imagine the principles involved in making that happen. Yubel suddenly broke the silence and asked if there was any point in overthinking those principles at all. Land turned his head toward her. He called out to her by name, prompting her to ask what. Curiously, he then asked if she could still use magic. Confused, she asked why he was asking that. After a brief pause, Yubel dismissed the question, saying never mind. There was no need for him to explain. Instead, she told him to bring his hands closer to hers. Land followed her, and in one effortless motion, Yubel sliced through his restraints as if they were nothing. She told him that was his answer. Land thanked her quietly, standing up as he processed what had just happened. He realized that although she was somewhat vulnerable to formless magic, physical-based magical effects could be altered or outright rejected, depending on her imagination. He wondered where the boundaries of that ability lay and what kind of rules or principles governed it. Perhaps, he thought, there was no point in dwelling on it. Even Yubel, surely, didn't know the exact logic behind it. Outside, Nu was walking beside Kanona. She immediately scolded him, asking if he was an idiot. Nu retorted that calling him that was mean, though he admitted that, in this case, he could somewhat feel the stupidity of his actions. Kanona shot back, reminding him that he had turned the entire area around the old Imperial Plaza into a mountain of rubble. Nu explained that he had assumed the district was already scheduled for deconstruction. Kanona then asked sarcastically if he planned to report to Captain Phrase that he had merely saved her the trouble of tearing the place down herself. Nu suggested that they go make the report together, but she declined, saying she'd rather not be the one to get scolded. She added that he had gone too far, completely out of character for him. If his targets had refused to surrender and had a chance to retaliate, he should have waited for support. She knew well, and that kind of reckless destruction was unusual for him. Nu replied that he had judged them too dangerous to let escape. He believed one of them in particular posed a significant threat. Kanona raised an eyebrow, surprised to hear him call one of the two a threat. Nu clarified that it wasn't just about their magic. It was the way she fought, the sensation of it. He said it reminded him of Captain Phrase herself. Kanona froze at that. Back with Yubel, she asked Land where they were, and he used his ability to pinpoint their exact location. He reported that they were atop a tower and that it was fairly high. Yubel turned to face the wall and decided that they should try to head toward that side, wondering aloud what lay below. From a distance, Land described a steep ravine, and Yubel said she could hear the commotion at the very bottom. Sure enough, the lowest level was a bustle of stalls and a marketplace. Yubel praised Land for the astonishing reach of his mana detection, and he returned the compliment, saying her hearing was surprisingly sharp. That wasn't the kind of distance from which one could hear that great commotion. They agreed they needed to escape and to avoid letting any rubble tumble down that slope. Meanwhile, Nu and Kanona were already making their way up. Yubel laughed at how they moved like phantoms. The real Land, hidden above, told her he would buy time and try to find an opening for escape. When the door opened, Nu presented the prisoners to Kanona. She watched silently, inspecting the ropes at their wrists. Land spoke first, offering to tell everything if they would release him, saying he no longer cared what happened to that woman. Nu snapped back that such words were out of line, reminding him that she had risked her life to protect him and that if he truly felt that way, he would be despised for it. Land protested that the girl had only threatened him and that he was innocent. Nu was shocked on how kids these days sell out their comrades so easily, then stepped closer and thanked him for his willingness to speak. At that moment, Nu noticed something and immediately apologized to Kinona, admitting he had made a mistake. Without hesitation, she leveled her weapon at Land and shattered his figure, revealing it to be a clone. She said one of them was gone and that clone magic was likely involved. Nu wondered when they had switched places. He was sure he had caught someone in their real form at the time of arrest. Kinona glanced over, and Nu added that he would search for the missing one. After Kinona and Yubel were left alone in the room, Kinona told Yubel that the rope doesn't matter anymore and asked if she wanted her to cut it. Without warning, Land leapt down from behind Kinona. She admitted that he was skilled at concealing his mana. He had even managed to trick Nu. Land stood there holding a staff and ordered her not to move. Yubel was already on her feet and ready to fight in front of him. Kinona frowned at their approach, calling it dangerous. Even if she let them escape now, she would have to report to her superiors that she had fought them with everything she had, and if she allowed them to run after capturing them, she would be accused of neglecting duty and might be expelled. Did they understand? She asked. Now that things had come to this, she said, she would have to battle them to the death, while warning them to avoid any unnecessary complications. She ordered them to lay down their weapons. Yubel merely laughed and suggested another way. Kinona did not expect what came next. In an instant, Yubel sliced that towering spire into many pieces with the nigh unstoppable cutter, Railsidon. Kinona did not flinch. She only demanded to know what they were planning. Yubel jumped beside Land and said there was a marketplace below them, before anyone down there could even notice. Couldn't Kinona simply move the rubble somewhere else? She asked, because otherwise they had no idea how many people might die. If she worried about being accused of neglecting duty, she could simply report that she had prioritized saving lives. When Yubel leapt, Kinona agreed that sounded like a good idea and told them to hurry and go. She called her a scum with a brittle smile, ordering them to move quickly and leave. The two took the opening and escaped, Kinona focusing on making sure the severed sections of the tower would not fall to the street. Land muttered that he was not pleased with her manner of doing things, and Yubel told him she knew and that she would be careful from now on. Meanwhile, Kinona managed to shift the rubble inward and Weg approached to say he would follow them. She stopped him. They could not handle the mess that would come if they pulled off something like that through the town. She asked him to tell Nu to let them go. Weg asked if she intended to let them off the hook, and Kinona replied she was getting them to freely leave behind intel this way. With their kind, the best solution was to capture everyone at once. Back at the bustling marketplace, Frieren scanned her surroundings carefully as she and her companions continued their patrol among the lively crowds. She remarked that she was certain what she was looking for had to be somewhere nearby. Sure enough, after a few moments, her eyes landed on Gazelle's stall. She told Fern and Stark to stay put and wait while she went ahead to check. But after a brief thought, she changed her mind and told Stark to come with her. Stark looked puzzled and asked why, while Fern stayed behind a short distance away. Frieren simply told him to just do as she said. The two approached and sat down at Gazelle's stall, where the merchant greeted her warmly and asked what she was looking for. Frieren picked up a jar and observed that it seemed to date back to the era of the Unified Empire. Gazelle praised her sharp eye, explaining that the item even came with a specialist certificate. If she bought it now, he said, he'd offer her a discount. His price was 6 coins, but Frieren countered by asking if he wouldn't let it go for 3. Gazelle was shocked that she'd offer half and said that was far too low. Frieren then urged Stark to help her out. Stark sighed and asked if the only reason she'd brought him along was so she wouldn't get ripped off while haggling. Still, Gazelle shook his head and said he couldn't lower the price to 3. 5 was as low as he could go. Frieren pressed again, offering 4 instead. Stark thought to himself how unbelievably stingy she was, while Gazelle, impressed by her persistence, admitted she drove a hard bargain and said he could probably learn a thing or two from her. Finally, he agreed to the deal. He extended his hand to seal it, and Frieren reached out to pay. But as he noticed his palm, she paused for a moment, looking at something. Gazelle asked if there was a problem, but Frieren smiled faintly and said none at all, then dropped the 4 coins into his hand. They gleamed faintly as they fell, giving off a strange hint of mana. Later that day, back at their base, Frieren was delighted, proudly announcing that she'd managed to buy the jar at a great bargain. She praised herself for her excellent negotiating skills. But when Falsh inspected the item, he frowned and said it looked fake. Frieren froze, then sank onto the floor with tears welling up in her eyes. Fern patted her shoulder comfortingly, while she sighed and muttered that their collection of junk just kept growing. The scene then shifted to the library, where Dinkin arrived carrying a book that he handed to the librarian, Routine. Routine asked if he was returning it already, noting that he had only borrowed it the other day. Dinkin explained that he suddenly had to take a trip and would likely be heading back home. Routine expected it would be quite a long journey, and so she wished him well and told him to take care. Dinkin was caught off guard when Routine mentioned it being a long trip, asking how she knew that. As far as Dinkin recalled, he had never told her he was from Weiss. Routine said that she may have unintentionally overheard someone discussing it somewhere. She was about to apologize in case she has offended him, but Dinkin reassured her that it was fine, saying that sort of thing happened all the time. As he prepared to leave, Dinkin remarked that he, too, had unintentionally overheard something once. That Routine was from Lord Beer, that she had been a fervent believer during the Northern War, and that she had a fondness for divination. He then asked if Routine had drawn a good fortune that morning. Routine replied that, as usual, she had expected a typical day, but it was just now. It seemed her divination had been wrong. After that exchange, Dinkin left the library and walked through the streets until he ran into Sensei. Sensei greeted him and asked if he was heading for Weiss. Before he left the imperial capital, there was something she wanted to ask. The two went to a small restaurant to talk privately. Sensei brought up the rumor about the plan to assassinate Siri. Dinkin replied calmly that he had no clue about any such plan. Sensei said she had expected that answer, but Dinkin insisted he was telling the truth. He asked whether Sensei really thought intelligence of that level would ever reach someone like him, a first-class mage while also being a central figure to the Empire. That, he said, was the same reason he had not been given classified details from the Continental Magic Association's own missions. Even though he had once acted as mediator between the Empire and the Association, he no longer held any deep connections to be privy to conspiracies of that scale. That was his current standing within the Empire. Still, Dinkin said he had no regrets about becoming a first-class mage, because through it, he had regained something he had lost long ago. Sensei apologized, admitting that she couldn't bring herself to believe him. Dinkin smiled faintly and said there was no need to apologize. If their positions were reversed, he doubted he would believe himself either. He then waved over the waiter, saying he had something else to ask Sensei, what she would like for dessert. He added that it would help her relax a little. After all, it wasn't good to look so tense during a meeting. Back at their base, Frieren sat silently on the floor, staring blankly at the wall. Sensei had just returned and, noticing the tense atmosphere, asked Fern what on earth was going on. Fern explained everything truthfully, that Frieren had bought a fake jar and was now sulking in despair. Sensei sighed and said that in situations like that, they had no choice but to accept it. Extending her long strands of hair, she gently picked up the jar and said that mistaken judgments were inevitable. Besides, she personally believed that even garbage could still hold value. If one looked closely, it was actually a fine-looking jar and could still serve as a room decoration. Frieren, however, snapped at her to shut up and told her not to touch her. She said her hair smelled like blood. Sensei looked surprised and insisted that was impossible. She had made sure to wash it thoroughly, and it should even have a sweet scent. Frieren just told her to leave. Puzzled, Sensei turned to Fern and asked what was wrong with her. Was Frieren always this irrationally temperamental? Fern glanced at the fuming Frieren sitting in silence and replied that what she was seeing now was an enraged Frieren venting her anger, something that only happened once in a decade. Even for her, this was only the second time she had ever witnessed it. At that state, Frieren could kill someone with words sharp enough to cut like knives, so it was best not to provoke her any further. Sensei then asked what they should do. Fern explained that according to Hyder, Frieren always returned to normal after about 10 minutes, so it wasn't really something to worry about. Sensei commented that 10 minutes of fury seemed rather short for something that supposedly only happened once a decade. A few moments later, Falsh spread out a map across the table while Sensei sat nearby, idly sniffing her own hair. She mused that she had probably fought long enough for the scent of blood to have been embedded into it. Still, she added, that was strictly metaphorical at best. Curious, she asked Fern if it really smelled like blood. She leaned in and said it actually had a sweet scent, and it smelled quite pleasant, even delicious. Hearing that, Sensei muttered that both master and disciple were clearly eccentrics. Suddenly, Frieren called out to Stark, grabbing their attention. She told him to come with her, they were going to get a refund. Fern noticed that her tone had returned to normal and remarked that it seemed Frieren had finally calmed down. Sensei pointed out that they were in the middle of a mission. Frieren casually replied that she had already said this had nothing to do with her, didn't she? As she headed for the door, she added that she was a little curious herself, so she'd take the chance to investigate while she was at it. Deep within a forest, the Shadow Warriors had gathered. Shrit had called for the meeting, and now that everyone was present, she suggested they proceed with a final review of their mission details. Around her were the members of their covert unit, the mercenary Shrit herself, Master Barkeeper Wolf, Father Clematis, Sister Lore, Liquor Shop Poster Girl Iris, Librarian Routine, the Vagrant Valros, and the Stallholder Gazelle. Father Clematis looked around and noted that they were still one person short. Shrit explained that Governor Luva had already entrusted them to deal with any nuisances and given them full discretion to act as they saw fit, so it would be fine even if he didn't attend. But Gazelle clarified that they weren't referring to the governor. The blacksmith isn't here yet, he said. Sister Lore added that her elder brother still hadn't shown up either. Shrit froze for a moment, realizing she had completely forgotten about him. She awkwardly said she would contact him later. Valros let out a dry chuckle, calling her a bloody drunk. Iris sighed and remarked that his only redeeming quality, really, was his skill with a sword. Father Clematis then stood and announced that, following Commander Luva's new official appointment, he had already drawn up their list of targets for this mission. He handed the document to Iris, explaining that, as usual, he had written the notes in a way simple enough for even a 5-year-old to understand, and told them to drill the information into their heads. Iris passed the paper to Routine and said that what Father Clematis really meant was that he thought they all had childish brains. Father Clematis said he appreciated her thanks. It was good practice for drafting teaching materials for the orphanage, after all. Shrit spoke next, explaining that their primary task was to lure away Ciri's bodyguards and eliminate them while the assassination was being carried out. As Routine looked through the list, she realized there were 7 bodyguards in total, including the mage Frieren from the Heroes Party and Sensei herself. She commented that their enemies were formidable. Upon hearing Frieren's name, Valros's expression changed. Wolf, who noticed, said it seemed like Valros remembered something. Sitting back, Valros replied that he had once seen her name on an old classified list that had later been scrapped, back during the time of political turmoil when several commanders were overthrown amidst disputes over who would succeed the previous emperor. Many active missions at the time had vanished without a trace. That, he said, was all he remembered. Wolf nodded in acknowledgement. Taking a sip from his drink, Valros added that he never bothered to investigate further. Besides, a real man, he said, keeps his secrets. Meanwhile, Gazelle was scanning the list and suddenly remarked that he had actually met Frieren and Stark earlier that morning when they stopped by his stall to shop. He was lucky, he said, that it happened before seeing the list. He was just a hair's breadth away from being executed for running from enemy targets. Iris then asked whether they seemed strong. Gazelle replied that if he had tried to confront them, he wouldn't be sitting there right now. That warrior, in particular, was a serious threat. At the very least, he said, if either she or Wolf are not with him, he wouldn't stand a chance. In other words, Shrit concluded, as long as at least one of them is there, there's a chance. Gazelle went quiet for a moment before saying that they all knew full well that, in the end, whatever happened to them no longer mattered. As always, they would simply fulfill their duty. They were mentally prepared to sacrifice themselves for the mission. Even so, he added, the real issue was Ciri. She was a mage who had existed since the mythical era. Did they really believe that Master Luva could bring down a monster like her? At the end of the day, he said flatly, He had no intention of dying in vain for a mere pipe dream. Shrit then handed something to Gazelle, who looked at her curiously and asked what it was. Shrit explained that it was something their master had entrusted to her care. He recalled the moment it was given to her. She admitted that even now, she still couldn't quite believe that their master had shown her such a thing. As Gazelle examined the item, his eyes widened in surprise. It was the Holy Wand emblem. Shrit explained that their master had once been involved in some rather shady dealings with a mage, and surely, they already knew who that mage was. The Great Mage Minos, Gazelle said. Shrit nodded and began to recount the story. 2 decades ago, the witch Minos had been convicted of high treason following the unending wars between the southern nations. She was ultimately defeated by a nameless warrior from a small, remote country. A brief image of that event flashed, the battle that left Luva with a deep scar on the right side of his face, forcing him to wear an eye patch ever since. According to records, both of them had struck each other simultaneously. That was why Gazelle doubted that Luva was truly that warrior. Shrit, however, dismissed the speculation. Regardless, one of the 3 great mages had vanished from the world, and that fact would never change. In the world of magic, she said, what one could not imagine could never become reality. At the very least, Master Luva did not believe that the great mages were invincible monsters. After the meeting concluded, Routine and Iris returned together through the dimly lit corridors. Iris sighed, commenting on how absurd their mission to assassinate Ciri was. She complained that she was supposed to enjoy the National Foundation Festival with her friends, but instead, she was stuck working with someone as gloomy as Routine. Routine reminded her that Wolf had specifically ordered them not to work alone. Iris glanced around the empty underground passage and remarked that not a single soul seemed to be down there. She asked if the passage really connected to the palace. Routine explained that it was actually an evacuation route that dated back to the Unified Empire era. She patrolled there regularly, but she just wants to ensure it was still functional, since it would be bad news if it happened to be out of commission when the time came. Iris teased her for worrying too much and ran ahead, urging her to hurry up so they could finish. Routine warned her that it was dangerous to run there, but it was already too late. Iris's foot caught on something, a hidden trigger. In an instant, a rain of arrows fired from the walls, striking the area around them. Iris was hit and fell, while Routine managed to catch one of the arrows in her hand. She calmly explained that the traps had been installed by Wolf himself. But as she turned to check on Iris, she suddenly sat up and spat something out. She had bitten the arrow midair, stopping it with her teeth. As Iris stood up and dusted herself off, she told Routine she really should have warned her earlier. Routine asked if she was all right, and she casually replied that she had managed to stop the arrow with her teeth anyway. But Routine reminded her that wasn't the real issue. The arrow had been coated in poison. Iris asked if it was the deadly kind, to which she calmly said yes. Even then, she didn't seem the least bit bothered. There was no problem, she said, since she was immune to poison. At worst, she'd just get a stomachache, and that would be the extent of it. Routine asked if that kind of resistance was natural for her body. Thinking aloud, she added that Valros also had a body that could handle poison, though in his case, it was by weeping it out. Iris scowled and told her not to compare her to that goblin of a man. Training for that kind of resistance existed, she said, though it was excruciating to go through. As they walked on, she suddenly slowed and looked off into the distance, as though sensing something. Routine asked what was wrong, but she dismissed it with a shrug, saying she was just imagining things. Still, she admitted this was her first mission in a long while, one where their lives were truly at stake. She said she was looking forward to the battle, and Routine quietly agreed. Unbeknownst to them, Falsh was also down in the underground passage, quietly observing from behind a stone pillar. He had overheard every word of their conversation. Meanwhile, in the bar where Wolf worked, Gazelle stopped by and placed 4 coins on the counter. Wolf raised a brow and remarked that it was rare for him to actually pay his tab, if only Shrit would follow his example. Gazelle mentioned he just wanted to settle his debts before he died. Wolf frowned and told him not to say such ominous things. Back at the bustling marketplace, Frieren had returned with Fern and Stark, looking for Gazelle's stall. When they arrived, Fern noted that the stall holder seemed to be gone. Frieren guessed that he must have already left. Whatever, she said. The truth, she admitted, was that she had secretly cast a pursuit magic spell on the silver coin she gave him. Frieren raised a brow and asked why she would do that. Surely, she hadn't thought she'd get swindled again. Frieren smiled faintly and said she had seen through everything. Frieren retorted and asked why she was lying. Stark was curious. Hadn't she cried and thrown a fit after realizing she'd been fooled? Frieren brushed them off and told them enough jokes. She then asked if Stark had noticed that the stall holder was a warrior. Stark, surprised, asked if she meant he might be a shadow warrior. He replied that it was hard to say for sure from that single encounter, but it wasn't unusual for a merchant to have once been a fighter. She added that the man had a dwarf companion, and though he looked like a washed-up drunk now, she recognized him as the hero Rasen from the far north. Stark was astonished. Frieren explained that Rasen was the hero who had reclaimed imperial territory from demons more than 80 years ago, a man once greatly admired. Stark wondered how such a person ended up like that. Frieren answered that he had simply been forgotten, as often happened with heroes. Still, she could never forget his face. It felt like only yesterday when he shook hands with Himmel himself. She had also heard from locals along the way that he now went by the name Valros. She couldn't help but wonder why he had chosen that alias. To her, it didn't seem like a coincidence at all. Stark then recalled that they had paid him in silver coins. He pointed out that the stall holder might have already spent them. Frieren replied that they were pure silver coins, highly valuable, and that someone like him wouldn't spend them so easily. She was certain he still had them on hand, and if he truly was a shadow warrior, tracking those coins could lead them straight to the source of his funding. Frieren, however, reminded her that it was still only speculation. But Stark countered that Frieren's intuition in situations like these was always on point. Frieren sighed and muttered that her judgment on grimoires, on the other hand, tended to miss the mark. Stark whispered for her not to say that, because if Frieren heard, she'd start crying again. Frieren then said that she had already explained her reasons, but there was still one more thing she wanted to say. Her voice trembled as she held back tears, confessing that what she really wanted was to get back her secret savings. Frieren sighed, noting that Frieren looked completely dejected. Stark, meanwhile, said that seemed dead serious. At the bar where Wolf is, Gazelle had already fallen asleep from drinking too much. The scene then shifted to the church, where Valros had gone to look for Father Clematis. He asked for help, saying he'll accept anything, and Father Clematis replied that he was completely soaked. This made the priest curious about what had happened, and Valros answered that he had fallen into the river. Father Clematis went quiet for a moment before commenting that it must have been a disaster, and since it was cold outside, he invited Valros to warm himself inside. He told him to go ahead and enter, then opened the door and let him in. Once no one else could hear them, Father Clematis addressed him as Dear Comrade and asked for an update on everything. Valros said he had learned that the evacuation route from the Unified Empire era was functional and had no issues, to which Father Clematis responded that the reports he had received were different. He had heard that the middle section was flooded and impossible to pass through, and according to routine, the melting snow likely caused it. Routine seemed rather erudite, and Valros insisted that this was exactly why he had double-checked. That level of flooding was nothing to a true warrior, and as long as one did not lose their sense of direction within the darkness, they would be able to get out after 20 minutes. The depth could sometimes be difficult to gauge, but relying on the spirit made it possible. Father Clematis praised the excellent intel and said that now he understood Valros was the only one capable of pulling it off. Sister Lore then handed Valros a dry towel. Moments later, Father Clematis invited Valros to sit for a moment, suggesting that they focus on the operation. He said Valros possessed the greatest might among their shadow warriors, and that inserting him behind enemy lines would give them a massive strategic advantage. As for how to use a pawn like him, Father Clematis wanted to decide that while they discussed the plan, all while drinking warm black tea. He asked Sister Lore for tea, but she told him he should get it himself because she was heading out to buy ceremonial wine. He then asked whether she thought he knew where the tea leaves were kept, but she hurried out, saying she would be back later. Forced by the situation, Father Clematis went to the kitchen, and while searching, he remarked that Sister Lore seemed to hate him. Valros asked if he had any idea why, and the priest answered that there were so many possible reasons that he was no longer sure which one it could be. Valros could hardly believe that Father Clematis had described him as someone with the greatest might, insisting that only the priest would value him that highly. The youngster named Luva, he said, was far more powerful than him, a reminder of how cruel the passing of time could be. Father Clematis mentioned that he had said something before about how he would stay on active duty his entire life, and Valros replied that he did not want to sound old, but he could still keep up as long as he remained in good condition over the next 10 years. For now, Father Clematis said, Valros was more than enough of a beast. But that aside, he asked him for help in the search. Valros pointed to the side and said that if he was looking for the tea leaves, they were in the dresser across the room. When Clematis asked how he knew that, Valros said he sometimes borrowed them. He opened the dresser and took out the jar of tea, saying that after all, things got chilly during winter. Father Clematis commented that in that case, Valros had been coming here to steal and reminded him that he was in the presence of the goddess. He told him not to blame him if he ended up in hell, but he asked the priest if he had any idea exactly how many people he had killed. He replied that Valros should be the one to tell him, but the priest said he was only joking and that he was free to laugh. Valros was impressed and said that now he understood why he was hated. The scene shifted to another place, where Sister Lore found Shrit sitting outside the bar. She woke her and spoke to her, asking if she had drunk a lot, and she responded that Sister Lore should ask the bottle since it refused to stop loving her. The master barkeeper, Wolf, then stepped out and said she had already drunk far too much and that he had told her to go home. Sister Lore entered the bar to buy something, searching for ceremonial wine. Wolf asked if she was sure she wanted to buy such an important item there, since he only had cheap offerings available. As he browsed through the displays, the sleeping gazelle slowly began to wake up. Sister Lore said that as long as a person had faith, material value meant nothing, which was what Father Clematis believed. Wolf called Clematis a smooth talker and said he probably just wanted to save money, asking if he should offer her the cheapest one they had. Sister Lore insisted that it was ridiculous because it was for the ceremony of the National Foundation Festival, and they could not use something blatantly cheap. But Wolf reminded her that she had just said the cost was irrelevant. Gazelle suddenly slammed his beer mug onto the table and said they were losing their minds, because even though they knew that in just 2 days they might all be dead, they were still talking like this. Sister Lore asked if he was drunk, and Wolf said he most likely was, though the drunk outside is already a handful. He then spoke to Gazelle, saying that the majority of a person's life was spent on daily living, and if he did not handle these things properly, he would have regrets when he failed to die. He added that he personally already had many regrets. He also said he was happy that he had paid off his tab, but if he poured everything he had into preparing for death, he would never accept that. Gazelle responded that it had been easy money because he managed to sell goods at the National Foundation Festival. While Wolf held the money, Sister Lore noticed something and asked what it was. Wolf said it was the entire tab that Gazelle had paid. She noticed it to be silver straw coins, the currency of the central countries with the highest silver purity, if she remembered correctly. She asked to see them. Wolf agreed but asked why, and Sister Lore urged him to hurry. He tossed one to her, and when she caught it, she said she could feel mana coming from it. It was most likely pursuit magic. Gazelle said that was impossible. Sister Lore explained that it was understandable he could not notice it because the other party was a master. They had used silver as a catalyst to skillfully hide mana inside it. Because of this, she called Wolf and Gazelle and ordered them to prepare for their battle formation. Outside, Frieren, Stark, and Fern were approaching the area. Frieren sensed something, and when Fern asked what the problem was, she said they had been detected. Valros returned to the church, and Father Clematis asked what the problem was and whether he had forgotten something. Valros was carrying an injured cat, and Clematis said it was hopeless and could no longer be saved, though he at least wished to offer a prayer for it, in case there was still some salvation left for the creature. Valros left anyway, saying it was fine, because once the cat died it would simply return to nothingness, and there was no need for salvation. He sat down on a bench while holding the injured cat in his arms. Zine approached and asked if the cat belonged to him, and Valros answered that it did. Even though the cat was long past its prime, it still tried to cross the area where wagons frequently passed, and he called it a stupid fool for doing so. Zine knelt beside him and asked to take a look at the cat, placing his hand over its injured part, which caused the cat to suddenly stand up and leap away as if nothing had happened. He had healed it completely, and Valros could hardly believe it. The cat hurriedly ran under the bench, and Zine commented that it seemed unfriendly. Valros explained that his cat was simply afraid of strangers, then thanked him deeply. He offered Zine some alcohol as thanks, but Zine declined and said that instead, he was looking for someone. He showed a picture and asked if the appearance seemed familiar. He opened a locket that held a photo of the two of them together, and Valros paused when he saw it. Zine added that the man was a weirdo who called himself Warrior Gorilla. Valros stayed silent for a moment, thinking, before saying that it doesn't ring a bell. Still, if Zine was searching for information, he suggested trying the bar, saying he had a favorite place there and he would show him the way. Zine thanked him, and as they walked, Valros asked why he was looking for that man. Zine explained that he was like a brother to him, and that when they were young, they promised each other they would become adventurers together. Valros said he could already picture it. Then, he asked out of curiosity what Warrior Gorilla's real name was. Zine thought about it, and admitted he did not know. He looked at him, and suddenly burst into laughter, unable to believe it. At the bar, the drunken Shrit was blocking the doorway, while inside, Gazelle, Wolf, and Sister Lore were gathered. Sister Lore raised the silver coin and ordered them to prepare for battle. Frieren suddenly stopped and sensed something, and when Fern asked what was wrong, she looked behind with a serious expression and said they had been detected through pursuit magic. High above, Stark noticed something in the sky. He immediately became alert, pushed Frieren aside, while she told them to hurry and get out of there. The thing he had seen was an arrow. Stark quickly positioned his body to shield Frieren before it could strike her. Fern grew worried when she saw Stark was wounded, and Frieren made her sit down. They checked on him, and he brushed it off as no big deal. Meanwhile, Wolf was positioned atop a tall building, impressed by how quickly Stark had reacted, though there was still distance between them. He noted that Stark was a good warrior, which made the situation even more unfortunate. As they hid, Frieren analyzed the angle, thinking that if they were struck from that direction, then although it sounded unbelievable, she suspected they had been targeted from that distant tower. That level of skill was unfathomable. Fern asked to be allowed to fire back, but Frieren said it was clear they would never detect any mana at this distance, and she could not fire magic relying only on pure eyesight. Still, she added silently that she would not call it impossible considering Fern's abilities. Valros arrived at the bar with Zine in tow, but Shrit was still sitting in front of the door. Valros told her to move so they could enter, but Shrit replied that the shop was already closed. Valros said she did not get to decide that, but Shrit stubbornly insisted it was truly closed. Valros did not bother pushing the issue any further and said it seemed there was some annoying drunk there, so they would go somewhere else instead. He explained that they only needed to pass through a concealed pathway because there was a secret hole in the wall there. Zine noticed something behind them and turned around, and when Valros asked what the problem was, he said it was nothing and apologized, explaining that he had just remembered he had urgent business. Valros said he understood and apologized as well for not being much help, wishing that Zine would find his brother soon. Zine agreed and took his leave, and Valros noticed something as he walked away. While positioned on the rooftops, Wolf spoke to Sister Lore and told her he could not make a shot from where he was, urging her to give him another good spot. Using pursuit magic, she said it seemed the enemies had taken their chance and were running into the back alley, and their escape route appeared precise. They needed to consider that the enemy had already calculated their firing location. As they ran, Fern asked whether it was easy to detect the source of Frieren's magic, and Frieren replied that it would be difficult if mankind's magic was being used. When it came to tracing the source, detection was unknown territory. Fern wondered if it might be demonic, but Frieren denied it. She said she knew that magic, and at the moment, they were facing someone who could control goddess magic, referring specifically to Sister Lore. Sister Lore herself remained focused while speaking with Wolf. In any case, she said that if the enemies did not come out onto the major road, they would have no other way out. And knowing Wolf, he could still strike them even in the middle of a crowd. Wolf said that would be true as long as the warrior did not interfere, but she then asked whether he had not already dealt with that warrior. He agreed, and indeed, the wound Stark had taken suddenly caused him to collapse to the ground while they were running. Frieren and Fern immediately stopped, concerned for him. Fern asked Frieren what was happening, and Frieren said he had been poisoned. Zine wandered through the area, and what he had sensed earlier turned out to be Frieren. He said that mana was something he knew well and that there was no way he could mistake it. He reacted with confusion, wondering why the goddess was being so whimsical. Back at their base, they had laid Stark on the ground as she tried to determine how he could be cured. Frieren asked if she had finished analyzing the poison, and Frieren said that Stark was reacting in a way she had never seen before. Frieren suggested consulting the church, but the distance was too far, and since they were being targeted by a long-range archer, attempting to cross the major streets would be a death wish. Frieren added that she was concerned by the enemy's use of goddess magic, and although they might be fine if they could find a priest away from the main roads, she could not deny the possibility that the enemy might be connected to the church. Frieren became worried about what they could possibly do, and Frieren, deep in thought, still had no answer. They stayed silent as they searched for a solution. Frieren brought up the idea of an antidote, saying the archer who shot Stark might have one. Frieren said she had already considered that. Frieren added that an adventurer party that deals with poisons always keeps an antidote on hand for rare cases when it becomes necessary, because there is no recovery if they accidentally injure one of their own through misuse, something Frieren herself had taught her. Frieren agreed, but Frieren questioned why she remained so quiet. Frieren said if she explained that, Frieren would definitely lose her composure. Frieren responded that of course she would, but Frieren insisted that since they were inside a town, they had to look for an alternative cure. Frieren refused to accept that, saying it was pointless because Stark could die. Frieren explained that this was the imperial capital, the metropolis of the greatest magical civilization of mankind, and she cannot allow hostility. The safety of their lives depended on maintaining that order. If they made a mistake and a civilian was harmed, they would create enemies for everything they were involved in. The Empire's mages, who were superior in fighting against humans, were far more terrifying than Frieren imagined. Frieren told her to take a deep breath and listen. Frieren then asked if she did not believe in her abilities, and Frieren answered directly that right now, she did not. She asked if Frieren realized the kind of situation she was in. Their doors suddenly opened, and Frieren quickly stood up to stop Frieren from reacting, because the person who appeared was Zine. He greeted them, saying it had been quite some time. He admitted he never expected they would meet again, but Frieren smiled and said she had told him see you before. He wanted to ask about their situation but said it would only be rhetorical, so he asked them to let him check. He knelt beside Stark to examine him and said Stark's condition was severe. Frieren asked if it could be cured, and Zine said he was not sure because he would need to try first before knowing. Frieren was shocked to see Zine there and asked what was happening. Frieren said she had expected Frieren not to notice. While they were fleeing, she had sensed Zine's mana and escaped in his direction, releasing mana to alert him to their presence. Since they were being pursued by goddess magic, there was no benefit in hiding or concealing their mana. On top of that, Zine was not the target of the pursuit, unlike them, so there was no concern that he would be struck. That had been the only way for them to meet safely, and although she admitted it was a coincidence that they discovered Zine, mages needed composure in order to capitalize on coincidences like that. Frieren fell silent at her explanation. Meanwhile, Zine was focused on checking Stark's condition. He used his ability to treat the part of Stark's body that had been struck by the arrow, then advised that Stark needed to rest for now. Frieren felt relieved upon hearing that. Zine added that Stark was fortunate, because had it been anyone else, even a graze from that arrow could have resulted in instant death. That was how lethal the poison was. Frieren thanked him and called him a lifesaver for arriving when he did, and Frieren offered her gratitude as well. Zine said it was all good. Frieren then noted that it had been quite a while since they last saw each other and asked why he was in the imperial capital. He said it was a long story, but Gorilla might be somewhere in that town. Still, he did not think they had time to discuss it leisurely and asked what had happened to Stark. Back at the bar, Shrit was still sitting outside while Sister Lore concentrated inside. She said it looked like the enemies were hiding in the deserted housing area. Wolf asked if it was possible to drive them into the open to fight, since he would be able to target them if that happened. Sister Lore contacted Gazelle and asked if he could hear her, and she ordered him to go to the deserted housing. Gazelle answered that he understood and was already heading there. She explained that the deserted housing was located at the edge of their communication range, and if the enemies chose not to fight and decided to run, he should not chase them too far. Gazelle said he understood. Back with Frieren. After they finished explaining the situation to Zine, He realized that even though they did not know who their enemy was, the enemy had already detected them and begun the pursuit. He said it was concerning how well coordinated they were. Frieren asked what he meant, and he explained that if he prodded the vulnerable detection spot, he would be able to determine the location of the enemy priest. He then searched for a map of the area, thinking they might not have one, but Frieren said they did. When he asked why she carried one, she answered that she had been forced to bring it for the mission, and the one who gave it to her was Sensei. As usual, Zine found himself dragged into another problem. He opened the map, spread it across the table, and was able to pinpoint the enemy's exact location. Frieren agreed with him. However, Zine asked whether they could target that area directly without hesitation. Frieren said that to pull something like that off, they would need significant training, and it seemed their enemy did not want to cause an uproar in town, so she imagined they would not allow themselves to fire haphazardly. She understood the reasoning behind Zine's point, because for their enemy, goddess magic was not only for assisting combat, but was also part of the foundation of their tactics. Frieren asked what she meant, but before Frieren could answer, someone suddenly leaped in and targeted Frieren with a sword. It was Gazelle. Stark, however, managed to stand up immediately and block the attack despite still recovering, waking just in time to defend her. Gazelle said that this was not how the story was supposed to go. Frieren used magic in response, causing a powerful explosion within their base. An arrow then flew toward them right after, but Stark deflected it with his axe, preventing it from hitting anyone. A large hole was blown open in their room, and Gazelle hid against the wall while they supported the weakened Stark. Gazelle said he did not want to handle such a dangerous role again. On the rooftop above, Wolf was already in position, waiting for the smoke around the enemy's location to clear. He praised Gazelle for excellent work, saying their targets were now exposed. The four ducked behind a table for cover. Frieren told Stark well done, and Frieren said he had saved her. However, Zine had already said Stark should be resting, and Stark was pushing himself far too hard. Even so, Frieren said she expected no less from his healing, since his recovery was remarkably fast. When she said that, Zine himself could not believe Stark was already able to move. Frieren proudly noted that he was finally starting to act like a warrior. She then asked Zine if the location he had identified for the enemy priest was not just some random spot. Zine answered that it was indeed the correct location. He then told Frieren that the enemy's weakness was their complete reliance on goddess magic, which made Frieren realize that if they targeted the headquarters, the enemy party would be immobilized. She was about to say something more to Frieren, but she said it was fine, since everything had already begun, and she was certain Frieren would not miss at that distance. While they hid behind the table, Frieren said that the real question now was how Frieren could secure the trajectory. If the angle was too high, there was a chance the shot would tear through the roof of a nearby building, which could even cause the upper floor to collapse if she miscalculated. Even though they already knew the enemy's location, they would still need at least some visual confirmation to ensure the shot would be safe. Frieren realized how difficult it was to fight inside a town, and Frieren had told her to stay calm, breathe deeply, and steady her emotions. Zine then asked Frieren what her plan was. Frieren said that at this point, their only option was to establish a clear target from the sky and fire from above. Zine asked if she had a death wish, and Frieren admitted that he had a good point, since they could end up being targeted by another poisoned arrow. Although accuracy was a concern, she thought that ultimately she had no choice but to obstruct the enemy with defensive magic that would cover the entire area. However, considering the archer's skill, their defense could still be pierced, but it seemed they had no choice but to gamble. Frieren called out to her, but Frieren said she would not allow a child who was not yet calm to fight. Frieren asked if the same thing had not happened at the same time yesterday, and wondered if they could predict proper timing through mana detection. Frieren paused, saying it was very interesting and worth trying. From a distance, Gazelle observed and noticed that their group had stopped moving, and wondered if that meant he would be forced to unleash everything. Sister Lore corrected him, saying no, one of them was already moving, and that one was Frieren, who had taken off into the sky. From Wolf's position, he noted that no defensive magic seemed to have been deployed, and he assumed they had thrown all their resources into maximizing her flight speed. Sister Lore told him he could shoot her down at that speed, and Wolf said he knew. But before he could release his arrow, the fireworks filled the sky. Frieren was pleased, saying Fern's launch timing had been spot on. Because of that, Wolf realized she had blended perfectly into the brightness of the National Foundation Festival's fireworks. He concluded that they had planned this, and as a result, he could no longer establish a clear shot. As he looked upward, Gazelle said that if they were taking that much altitude, it meant they were aiming directly for Lore at their headquarters. Because of that, Wolf told Lore to escape her position immediately, and as she ran, she replied that she was already one step ahead of him, having already fled outside. While in the air, Fern noticed that no arrows had been fired, meaning their archer was relying entirely on vision after all. For now, she needed only to locate the coordinates, but she realized it no longer mattered. Moments earlier, she had sensed a tremendous surge of mana spilling from that spot, yet now there was nothing. Chances were, they had already concealed their mana and fled. She remembered Frieren's advice to calm herself and focus, and she told herself she could buy enough time until the fireworks ended. She noticed that magic was being used all throughout the town, even by ordinary people, and many of their objects also carried magical traces. Because of that, the town was overflowing with noise. Even so, she had already learned the mana signatures of their targets. In order to escape from that dangerous position where they were being targeted from the sky, the enemy would inevitably reveal some form of movement, and she was certain she would be able to track them. Sister Lore ran quickly as she searched for a place to hide, but she grew alarmed when she realized her position had been exposed. She looked at the silver coin and thought that the source detection was likely the cause, so she decided to simply throw the coin onto the ground. She thought that the enemy must also have a priest with them, and that priest seemed to be superior. Wolf urged her to keep running as long as she could until the fireworks ended, telling her they would win as long as she could hold on. She stopped to catch her breath and told him not to lump her together with muscle brains like him, and Wolf answered that she should just let Shrit carry her. However, she remembered seeing Shrit vomiting in the back alley earlier. She resumed running again, calling Shrit a drunkard and saying she could not believe she had done that in the middle of battle. She then called Gazelle and told him to fall back and carry her instead. Gazelle laughed and said that if that were truly an option, even he would gladly leave that place just to accompany her. Unexpectedly, Wolf said that was a negative. He targeted Frieren's base again, but when he fired an arrow at the table, they were no longer hiding behind it. Wolf said that if they stopped pinning them down, Frieren would be free to move. Frieren and the others had already shifted positions, and she asked Zine if Stark was doing all right. Zine said it was impossible for him to be fine. From the beginning, Stark had not been in any condition to move. In his view, Stark had pushed himself far too hard. Frieren apologized and told him that Stark could rest now. She thought to herself that if she did not act carefully, Zine and Stark could die. On top of that, she still did not know the locations of the enemy combatants. Wolf and Gazelle were already in their positions. In Frieren's mind, they were at an insane disadvantage. If only she could determine their positions through mana detection, but she believed the enemy priest was thinking the exact same thing. Because Fern had been blending perfectly into the magical firework display, it would be difficult for her opponent to identify her exact location through mana detection. However, for a considerable master, it was still possible to figure out where Fern was. And she was right, because Sister Lore succeeded in pinpointing her location. She knew exactly where Fern was. Frieren wondered if they had any way to communicate airborne coordinates. Sister Lore remained silent for a moment, and Wolf asked for orders. Sister Lore said she would shut down her mana manipulation completely, and from that altitude, she would be able to shoot Fern down to her death. Frieren noticed that their enemy was well trained. Even if the location could not be verbally conveyed, she imagined that anyone capable of using mana detection would naturally act on their own, guided by magic. And she was right, because Sister Lore had already begun her attack and used Sacred Arrest on Fern. However, doing so only revealed her location. Once Fern pinpointed where Lore was, she struck from the sky without hesitation, and her shot landed perfectly. Frieren said that unfortunately for their opponents, once magic was released in a rapid exchange, Fern is indomitable. As they hid, Zine asked whether Fern's action had been too noticeable, and Frieren said it would only last for a moment and that Fern had blended into the fireworks. Even if there was some risk, no one would notice the battle unless they were a true master. Zine wondered if it was not dangerous if a master did notice, and Frieren answered yes, which was why they needed to hurry and run. On a rooftop, Nu was quietly watching the fireworks and noticed something unusual. Elsewhere, Yubel observed the event and said Fern was showing off. She asked Land if they should leave while they still had the chance. Inside an office, Kanona watched as well and told Weg to instruct Nu to stay on standby. It would be too much trouble for them if Nu went wild again. Back to Wolf. He said that if there were no further orders to continue the battle, then they would have to retreat. Gazelle, who stood with him, added that it seemed Sister Lore had been saved by the magic resistance of her gear. If the attack had struck her face directly, she would definitely be dead. Wolf wondered aloud whether the enemy had intentionally chosen not to kill her. After the event, Frieren met with Falsh and Sensei to discuss what had happened. Once Frieren finished explaining, Sensei realized they had gotten themselves into a battle with a group said to be Shadow Warriors. Falsh agreed it was a problem if the enemy had their own priest. With the Empire's magical techniques, it was unsurprising that they had advanced far beyond other nations in deciphering goddess magic. However, Sensei said they had made significant progress in understanding the enemy's tactics because of this battle and that Frieren had contributed greatly. She instructed her to tell Fern and the others to take a good long rest. As Frieren was about to leave, Sensei called to her again, but Frieren said she did not need to say anything. She would help with their missions because it motivated Fern. She added that the first-class mage in their group was Fern, and she herself was merely her comrade. She would follow wherever Fern went. Sensei apologized for dragging her into this, and Frieren said it was funny because the thought had not crossed her mind at all. She addressed Sensei and said that she had lost the composure she had when she was an exam proctor, but she did not need to worry because Siri would not die. Frieren then stepped outside and closed the door. As Frieren left, Sensei said that she was just like Siri. She knew that not even a trace of arrogance had crossed Frieren's mind. 2 decades ago, the great mage Minos had been defeated by a human warrior, and the impression that elves were not invincible beings had slowly begun to spread throughout the world. Even though Siri should understand the horror of such an impression, she still viewed her own death as a distant illusion. However, living for countless millennia was not a reason to believe she could not die tomorrow. They had no choice but to protect her, even if that meant risking their own lives. Meanwhile, Fern and Stark explained everything to Zine, and because of that, he now more or less understood the situation. They had been dragged into a mission for the Continental Magic Association, which meant Frieren had successfully passed the first-class exam in Oysterst. He had expected Frieren to pass, but he found it impressive that even Fern had accomplished it. Fern then revealed that the truth was that Frieren had actually failed, and Zine asked how that happened. Frieren arrived just in time and said she had already told Sensei that she would help with their missions. She also conveyed that Sensei wanted all of them to take a proper rest. She praised Fern and Stark, calling them stellar, and she thanked Zine as well. Zine said he had simply been dragged into everything without knowing why. Still, Frieren had not expected to see him in the Imperial capital. Zine replied that he was becoming desperate to find Gorilla, but he had not traveled alone. There was demand for priests, after all. He had reached the capital thanks to the help of many parties. It had been, in his words, a pretty darn grand adventure. He had joined a party to explore a dungeon, tackled hunting quests, uncovered ancient treasure, and even met men with well-built pecs. Then he wondered aloud why all adventurers were middle-aged men. Even so, he said the journey had been enjoyable. Frieren explained that adventurers of the northern countries were veterans and that he was lucky to have been able to rely on them. Zine was nearly in tears as he lamented that he had not met a single older lady along the way, and Fern noticed how deeply saddened he was. Even so, Zine was happy that they had been able to reunite like this. Sensei then arrived to tell them that Yubel and Land had returned and were ready to share their intel. Yubel handed over what they had gathered and apologized for taking time because they had to shake off the personnel from the Special Forces of Magic. Sensei said it was fine and that they had done excellent work, performing admirably. After holding the documents, she realized that this was the intel gathered by Lineal. At the very least, they could now confirm the true identity of their enemy. In the distance, the Imperial capital came into view, seen from Siri's carriage. She was shocked to find that not a single trace of it remained in the area. She thought of her former student Flam and closed her eyes. She stepped down from her carriage and entered the capital, saying she never imagined she would ever visit the greatest magical civilization that Flam had built. She stood there for a moment before calling out to Falsh, telling him to stop that pointless behavior. She reminded him that she had already said she did not need protection. Since she had caught him, he slowly emerged from the shadows, and Siri observed him quietly. Even so, Falsh said that such a thing was out of the question. He cast a spell to wrap around Siri and keep her concealed. He knew she was unfamiliar with the locality, and so he asked to be allowed to guide her through the place. The spell formed into a cloak meant to protect her. Siri smiled and called him a silly worrywart. As they walked, Falsh remained alert to their surroundings while escorting her, but they stopped when she noticed a statue. She asked what it was, and he said it appeared to be a statue of the great mage Flam. He then wondered if it resembled her in any way. Siri lowered the hood of the cloak and asked whether he truly thought anyone could forget a mage with such extraordinary accomplishments. An era in which everyone in humanity gained the ability to cast magic. She said that the smile of the girl who praised such a fairy tale can only be remembered by her now, and it is enigmatic. She was the only person in the world who still remembered her now. Back at the base, the mages gathered for the mission briefing. Sensei said she had more or less figured out the true identity of their enemies. Without a doubt, they were the Shadow Warriors, and it seemed they truly existed. Frieren asked if by Shadow Warriors she meant the Empire's secret agency specializing in assassination, a legitimate imperial organization rather than a criminal syndicate. She said it would be rather unpleasant if that were indeed the case. Yubel guessed that they probably had the Empire's backing, and Land added that a single wrong move would surely turn the Empire itself into their enemy, so they needed to act cautiously. Frieren mentioned that Fern had already blown up one of them, to which Yubel replied that they had also been involved in a spectacular fight with the Special Forces of Magic, so they were in no position to comment on others. Sensei said that did not necessarily mean they are surely a legitimate organization. The Shadow Warriors had been dissolved 16 years ago by imperial decree issued by His Majesty the Emperor Emeritus because their chain of command was vague. Fern asked what it meant that the chain of command was vague. Sensei explained that the Shadow Warriors were an organization very different from a typical army force. Most authority was granted to the commander present on the field. From employing any form of force within the Empire to issuing assassination directives known as lists, everything depended on the judgment of each commander. Stark commented that it was excessive, meaning they were a unit capable of acting freely without orders from anyone above them. Fern then asked why such a structure would be allowed, and Frieren said it was because that type of power was strong. Sensei agreed. Having authority to act without waiting for higher orders meant they could coordinate in real time using their own judgment on the spot. There were records stating that the Shadow Warriors had fought as though they were a single being. Their coordination was astonishing, Fern said, and she could hardly believe they possessed such authority. Stark asked if that did not sound dangerous. Frieren brought up party battles, surprising them. When they fought as a party, she was the one who took command, but she asked if she was dangerous. Stark said she was not a bad person, and Frieren said that was exactly the point. Everything depended entirely on the commander. Those entrusted with such authority had been carefully selected. Frieren then asked Sensei if that was right, and Sensei agreed, explaining that such commanders were chosen from those who had sworn loyalty to the Empire. Frieren thought about it and said that it was not a very reliable basis for selecting commanders, and Sensei agreed. Everything had been fine back when the Empire's principles of existence were still clear, but as time passed, problems began to appear. Philosophies, ideals, and motivations started to differ between individuals. Little by little, the Shadow Warriors stopped acting according to the will of the Empire. The reason His Majesty, the Emperor Emeritus, decided to dissolve them was that people they considered obstacles had started dying far too easily. Speaking to all of them, Sensei added that a secret agency whose true nature not even the rulers could understand could only become a threat to the Empire. That was why they had been dissolved 16 years ago, Stark said, but he wondered if that was not suspicious. Because the enemies they were dealing with now were those very same Shadow Warriors. Land began thinking it made sense for ghosts to linger, since the commanders had been granted tremendous authority and were free to use force and kill whenever they wished. On top of that, they were talking about a secret agency whose actions were so opaque that even the Emperor Emeritus could not fully grasp them. He could not imagine they had been cleanly wiped out. Yubel said that was true, and that the commanders had sworn allegiance to the Empire. If the Shadow Warriors were dissolved, a force that had guided the Empire would disappear. She said it was not strange for someone to think that way. If it were her, she would probably burn with a sense of justice, believing she had to save the Empire from straying off the right path. Because of that, Frieren realized something about their situation. The scene then shifted to the office of the Empire's Special Magic Force. Weg reported to Kanona that they had confirmed the presence of traitors. Weg said that was correct. From the traces of the battle, they confirmed the involvement of the Shadow Warriors, which strengthened the credibility of the assassination scheme. Kanona listened silently, while Nu observed her and noticed the tense expression on her face. She became irritated, saying those bothersome issues kept appearing again and again. Weg then asked if they should heighten security, and she replied obviously. Their duty was to maintain the peace of the imperial capital during the National Foundation Festival. It did not matter whether it was the Continental Magic Association or the Shadow Warriors. If they disrupted the peace, they had to be dealt with. Weg excused himself, saying he would prepare a carriage since they would consult the higher-ups about reinforcing security. Kanona wondered aloud if it was not Captain Phrase's duty to handle negotiations, but Weg said he did not know where she was. Kanona was exasperated upon hearing that, asking why she always disappeared whenever things became hectic. She tossed something at Nu, who begged her not to vent her anger on him. Back at the meeting of the first-class mages, Falsch had already arrived. The papers containing the gathered information were handed out, and everyone examined them closely. Falsch asked if those were the profiles of the Shadow Warriors. The sheets displayed the sketched faces of Father Clematis and Schritt. Falsch was impressed that Lineal had managed to obtain something like that, saying she must have crossed an extremely dangerous bridge to get it. Sensei remarked that the next time they saw her, they might find a dead body. Falsch told her she should not say things like that as a joke. Sensei replied that Lineal was clearly a mage with superior skill to make it seem like On, and frightfully so. After all, once, during a practice match, she had managed to force Siri to her knees, a victory so significant that even Lernin could not accomplish it. That was probably why she had been chosen for the dangerous task of tracking the Empire's movements. She added that she had never met a mage who surpassed Lineal in battle skill. As Frieren looked over the list, she noticed the stall holder Gazelle as well as Valros. It turned out that Valros was also a Shadow Warrior after all. Zine fell silent when he saw the list. Stark asked him what was wrong, but Zine only stared at one of the photos and said it was nothing. Yubel placed a headband on Sensei, prompting her to ask what it was, and Yubel said she had just bought it. Yubel then told her to try meowing. Fern suddenly called out to Yubel, and so she asked what was going on. She wanted to know if Yubel could share some details about their battle with the Special Forces of Magic, saying Frieren had told her to ask. But Yubel replied that Four Eyes, or Land, had already explained everything to everyone earlier. Fern said what Frieren wanted to hear was Yubel's own perspective. She then asked if Yubel had heard the sound of a flying insect. Yubel grew curious and realized that must have been the strange sensation she had felt earlier, meaning her mind was not playing tricks on her. Even so, she said it was a long story. Her mana detection had not worked, and she had seen absolutely nothing, making it difficult. She stepped closer to Fern and said that even if she understood the secret behind that trick, she doubted it would lessen how threatening it was. She wondered where she should even begin. She explained that in order to tackle that mission, she had needed to go to Land's village, but Fern asked her to keep it concise. Yubel complained that it had been a long time since they last saw each other, and she wanted to talk properly. Meanwhile, Frieren and Stark were seriously studying the list. Stark asked if they were really planning to search the entire Imperial capital for the Shadow Warriors using only those profiles. The capital was far too large, and on top of that, they had already fought these enemies once, and with the ball happening tomorrow, he wondered if their opponents might simply hide until then. Frieren said he should bring that up with Sensei, the one who issued the order, but added that doing something was still better than doing nothing. Preparing against this assassination attempt was the best they could do. Still, She admitted she did not truly expect they would be able to find them. Whether for better or for worse, everything would happen at the ball. And Sister Lore, the woman whose mana had been their only lead, had not been detectable since their fight. If only Frieren had followed after her earlier. A flashback showed the moment Frieren brought Sister Lore down, and Nu's presence could be seen lurking nearby. Frieren said Frieren had been interrupted far earlier than expected. They still had no idea where the special forces of magic stood in all of this. Even so, Frieren had made the wise choice to withdraw rather than attempt to capture anyone. It seemed that their opponent was not the type to engage in a face-to-face confrontation. For now, Frieren was gathering detailed information, and once she finished, Frieren suggested that they search for the Shadow Warriors afterward. Stark noticed that Frieren and Yubel had been talking for a long while, and Frieren said it was because they were close friends. Stark then suddenly asked where Zine was, and Frieren said he had already left. He seemed even more motivated than the rest of them. Stark said he could see that, and she was not mistaken. Zine meanwhile looked weakened after seeing the photo and stared at the old picture he shared with Guerrilla Warrior, asking where he could possibly be now. The scene shifted to a workshop where Valros visited someone he called Kreis. He told Kreis to close the shop for now. The one he was speaking to was the blacksmith Kreis, who was also one of their fellow Shadow Warriors. Kreis asked why he was saying that and reminded him that he had a life of his own. Because of their Shadow Warrior missions, he said they were being dragged down by his drunken little sister who wasted all their hard-earned money on alcohol. Nobody's gonna babysit her if it costs them money. Valros replied that Shrit's skill with a sword ranked her among the top 5 even in the Empire. Kreis commented that he knew too much and said he was right, which was exactly why they would not die. They would surely survive the mission tomorrow. Kreis said he understood, so Valros should hurry back and stop interfering with other people's work. Valros then revealed that someone had been asking around about him. Kreis asked if that was so and wanted to know whether he had already handled that person. Valros said it was a priest with a goatee. Kreis immediately stopped what he was doing and asked if he had dealt with him. Valros said no, because there were too many people around. Besides, that man had confidently insisted that he was the acquaintance who called himself Warrior Gorilla. Valros said that no one would ever find someone like that even if they're around. Kreis commented that even he would say it was a silly name. He said he had made the right decision to abandon it. This reminded Valros of something. While he had been walking with Zine earlier, he had asked him if it was not obvious that it would be difficult to find someone if he did not even know the man's real name. An adult calling himself Warrior Gorilla. He could not imagine someone continuing to call himself that. When Valros said it was a silly name, Zine agreed and said it was indeed a silly name. If someone wanted to be a hero remembered forever, apparently the impact of a name mattered. His friend would even get angry whenever he called him anything else, because being called by a different name meant he would be forgotten. And because of that childish reason, he had developed a ridiculous obsession and eventually forgot his real name entirely. But now he's lost him completely. That was why Zine was now searching for Warrior Gorilla. If his friend had given up on that dream and was living happily somewhere else, then that would not be so bad. However, if he was still calling himself by that name, then Zine had to find him. They had promised each other they would become heroes who would be remembered forever together. How ridiculous, Valros commented, and Zine did not deny it. He laughed and said that, by the way, he was the priest with the goatee. But he replied that the name did not ring a bell for him. Back in the present, Valros said that the man in question was being referred to as the priest goatee. It sounded like a joke, yet in truth, that name was extremely memorable to him. Kreis asked why he was telling him all this, and Valros answered that according to Wolf's report, that man was apparently a priest belonging to Frieren's party and was now a new addition to their list. For that reason, they would also need to deal with him afterward. Kreis again asked why Valros was saying such things to him, wondering if he wanted him to tell him to stop. Valros then apologized. The scene shifted to a room where Iris handed Sister Lore a sandwich and told her to eat until she was full. Lore took it and sat on the bed to eat. Routine was there as well. Iris could not believe Lore refused to leave her bed and said it was fascinating. Since she seemed frightened, Iris asked if she wanted to hold her hand. Routine explained that it was natural. Lore was a superior commander in battle and had never been exposed to an enemy attack before today, so even she could hardly believe it. Iris said the fight had ended with a single blow anyway, and since Lore had not died, she was better off. She then held Lore's hand. She recalled that once, when she messed up during a mission, the enemy ripped off all of her fingernails, yet she never gave up the location of her allies. Since Father Clematis had been the battlefield commander at that time, he rescued her quickly and healed her. She asked what they thought he said to her afterward. According to her, Father Clematis told her that now she could wield a weapon again, so she should return to the front lines immediately. Iris said he was certainly twisted in the head. He's not repairing just some kind of golem here. Even though he knew how much pain she was in and how close she had been to crying. Routine then patted her head, and Iris told her to stop. She stood and said that in her opinion, it's right for Lore not to leave her bed. Otherwise, Clematis would only drag her into the battlefield again and again. Because to him, they were nothing more than pawns used to carry out missions. When they stepped out of the room, they found Father Clematis just outside, playing chess. He asked Iris how Lore was, and whether there was any chance she would return. Iris answered that it was negative and that Lore was now useless. Clematis replied that in that case, they should consider it a positive outcome that they managed to gather records from the battle. He would need to reorganize their strategy. As they were leaving, he called after Iris, and she turned with confusion. Clematis asked what would happen to his dinner. Iris bluntly asked who even cared. She said he might as well starve to death, then walked out and shut the door behind her. His companion at the board was Luva. Luva asked if Clematis was really planning to command the battle by himself. Clematis said he would sacrifice as many pawns as needed to secure victory, but that did not give him permission to lead them toward meaningless deaths. He had no intention of bringing deadweight onto the battlefield. He added that Lore had already been nurtured as his successor, and her defeat would serve as a good experience for her. Clematis said Lore was a clever girl, though not quite as clever as he had been when he was younger. That was why she needed to set things in order once this mission was finished. That way, he said, he could be rest assured, and afterward he could offer himself as a pawn in death. Luva, curious, asked how many people were going to die. Clematis did not answer immediately. He said that if Luva was not satisfied with his judgment, then as the commander of the Shadow Warriors, he was free to personally take over the reins. Was the Governor-General not in agreement with that? He asked. Because of what Clematis said about being the commander, he began to think. Even though he was aware that the title was essentially just a name, at the end of the day, he only acted as a killer, an uneducated warrior, and he too was nothing more than a pawn. Clematis then asked what the reason was for killing Ciri. Luva asked back whether a reason even mattered when accomplishing the mission, and he said it might lead to the outcome he desired. Their companion stepped between them, but Luva simply continued thinking. After a moment, he said that if Ciri died, magic in the entire world would disappear. Meanwhile, at the plaza where Flam's statue stood on display, Frieren found Zine. She realized he had failed to find his friend and said it could not be helped anymore. After all, the imperial capital was enormous. He then mentioned about them infiltrating the ball as Ciri's bodyguards. Zine asked her to bring him along. Frieren agreed, since it was more reassuring to have a priest with them. If they needed help, he said he would offer everything he could. So he was hoping. Yet he did not finish the sentence because Frieren abruptly apologized and told him she could not promise him anything. Both the Shadow Warriors and the Special Forces of Magic were not the type of enemies they could hold back from killing. To her, Fern's life and Stark's life were what mattered most. Because they would not hold back, she said she simply could not make any promises to him. Even so, she intended to pour everything necessary into achieving the most desirable outcome. Zine thanked her, saying that was good enough. When Frieren stood, Zine said it surprised him, because he had heard she was forced into this mission, yet she seemed more motivated than he expected. Frieren answered that the truth was she did not care at all about the assassination plan against Ciri. What she believed was that running away from such a dangerous mission was the right choice. However, that country had been left behind by her master. Even though almost all of her master's surviving traces were fakes now, such as the statues and the grimoires, the nation where all people were capable of using magic was the true legacy her master had left. Therefore, she planned to attain the most ideal outcome. That was something Ciri, who longed for battle, could never achieve. Frieren sensed something and said that even now, Ciri was already igniting the flames. She remarked that her temper was short. Ciri did not need to ignite mana flames at her just to prove she was immature. Zion was puzzled by what she meant and reacted. Soon, the four of them were walking together through the capital, and Frieren asked whether they would truly be able to secure a good outcome. Frieren considered it, since they were giving the enemy openings to ambush them. Frieren noticed that Frieren seemed tense. Frieren answered that Frieren was composed now, and even Zion had no idea what was happening. Frieren admitted that she had indeed been worked up and wondered aloud why she had failed to notice it earlier. They all asked what she meant. Frieren explained that there were two threats in the imperial capital that they could not afford to ignore. One was the commander of the Shadow Warriors, whose sole profile was missing and whose name they had no way of identifying. The other was the one who continued watching them even now. Chances were high, Frieren said, that someone had been observing everything occurring within the imperial capital. Frieren thought about it and said that ever since they entered the imperial capital, Frieren had felt as though they were constantly under surveillance. Frieren then asked if they were aware that not long ago, Ciri's mana detection had been spread across the entirety of the imperial capital. Frieren said she did not know that much, but it had been quite some time since she last felt something pressing down on her like an overwhelming force, something deeply unsettling. Frieren was certain that any superior mage would feel the same. But even so, considering Ciri's power, it was far too easy to notice because of how clear it was. It was unmistakably intentional. Sensei had been picking a fight with someone they were unable to perceive. Frieren asked if Frieren meant that this person was watching them. Frieren answered that she did not know. The possibility was high, but likely not enough to say for certain. That was how faint it was. Frieren wondered what she meant by faint, and Frieren explained that it was the mutual interference of mana detection. She had noticed it from the way Ciri had intentionally weakened her own detection. It was a mana detection so weak and so exact that it would not have been surprising if it disappeared at any moment. And that faint detection had been stretched across the entire imperial capital. Meanwhile, Kanona visited Captain Frey's office, and while she looked out toward the capital, Kanona reported that the security preparations for the ball were progressing smoothly. The captain said that was good and explained that she had already spoken with their superiors regarding allowing the special forces of magic to act freely. She told her not to worry and to carry out her mission. She then confirmed what mission she meant, making Captain Frey glance at her. Kanona said it was the mission of maintaining peace inside the Imperial Palace during the National Foundation Festival, the task she had appointed to them. She answered that was exactly the order she had given, because otherwise soldiers with blood-stained histories like them would never be permitted to set foot inside such a brilliant ball. Captain Frey asked if she had further questions regarding the mission details, and she replied that she did not. After sitting down, the captain said that the ball was a symbol of peace, so any form of interference from the Shadow Warriors was unacceptable, and Kanona understood that. In that case, Captain Frey suggested they discuss how that peace would be preserved, since unforeseen problems could arise at any moment, and they needed measures to prevent that. Kanona asked if she was expecting such unforeseen circumstances. Captain Frey turned toward her, noticing that it seemed Kanona did indeed have questions. She thought for a moment, then asked what they would do if a battle broke out between the Continental Magic Association and the Shadow Warriors. Captain Frey answered that aside from the use of military force granted by the authority of the state, no law in that country permitted killing. That meant that if such an incident occurred, it would fall under strict judgment according to the laws of the Empire. As Kanona turned to leave, Captain Frey said she would pray that Kanona made the correct decisions regarding whatever might happen. She looked out the window toward the Imperial capital once more and said that everything they did was for the Empire's eternal prosperity through magic. The next day, the first-class mages and their companions gathered again to meet with Ciri. Sensei explained that it was the final day of the National Foundation Festival, which meant the ball at the palace would be held that night. Their duty was to serve as Ciri's bodyguards, as she had been invited there as a foreign dignitary. Because the Shadow Warriors were secretly planning to assassinate the great mage Ciri, preventing that was to be the objective of their operation. Frieren asked how they would enter the ball itself. Ciri handed a paper to Falsh and said that since they had clearly arrived with invitations, they could make a grand entrance and walk straight through the front door. Falsh added that all necessary preparations for that had already been arranged. Sensei said that because they had the freedom to move independently, they would have far more ways to protect her. That reminded Siri to ask if there was a limit on how many attendants she was allowed to bring. Falsh checked the invitation again and said there was no such declaration, though he believed it would not be an issue as long as the number was reasonable. Siri said that very well, it seemed they would be fine. As gratitude for the gracious hospitality of His Majesty the Emperor, they would enter all together. Land suggested that since they were being monitored and were even considered fugitives, they should take a different route. Sensei agreed, saying she too felt it would be beneficial if they had a raiding team available. Yubel asked how violent they were allowed to be during the raid, and Siri replied that they could be as violent as they wished. Land could not believe what he heard and said that did not sound like a good idea. He looked at Yubel, prompting her to ask what that look was for. Land then addressed Siri, saying he had something he wanted to say about the operation, but before she even heard it, Siri immediately refused. Land continued anyway, asking why he had been paired with that woman. It was obvious they were not compatible. Siri said it was not that she did not understand how he felt, but asked in return whether if another person had been sent in her place, he's not repairing just some kind of golem here. Land fell silent at her words. Siri added that perhaps the streets of the imperial capital were nostalgic for him, since his parents and grandmother were connected to it. But before she could finish, Land cut her off and said he did not want to hear anything more. Siri stopped and told him he was free to believe whatever he wanted, but she did not think they were incompatible at all. If he wished to use his caution as a weapon, then he needed to learn how to hold the reins of that woman. Both of them were confused by her mention of reins. Land wondered where those reins even were, and Yubel simply smiled and said she might have left them somewhere. After the meeting, they all moved on to preparing for the ball. While Stark and Zine were changing, Zine commented that it seemed they needed to be in uniform. They had taken off their usual clothes and put on formal outfits, and since they were attending a ball, he said it was only natural to wear something like that. While looking into the mirror, Zine said that as always, he was not used to wearing such clothing, but Stark replied that it was surprisingly easy to move in, so he thought it was fine. Zine then sat down, clearly troubled by something. He called Stark and said there had been something on his mind for a while, but the mood had not felt right earlier to bring it up. Stark said he understood why he feels queasy after being dragged into this situation so suddenly. If he doesn't mind him hearing it out, he told him to say it if he felt comfortable. With a straight face, Zine asked whether Stark thought there would be bewitching ladies at the ball. Stark said that was not something he should be bringing up now. In another room, Sensei was helping Fern put on her dress, tightening the ribbon at the back, and Fern asked her to pull it tight enough that she could no longer breathe. Sensei refused, saying Fern would not be able to fight like that. Frieren approached to ask Fern to tie her hair, and she snapped back, asking whether she did not realize this was hardly the time for that. Frieren grew worried at her sharp glare and ended up sitting quietly on the bed. Siri felt sorry for her, saying she could not tie her hair without her student. Frieren answered that they were in the same position, were they not? Siri replied that that's how much she's revered, unlike her. Siri picked up a comb and said that if Frieren insisted that she absolutely needed this done, she would be willing to tie her hair for her. Frieren told her to drop dead, and Siri said that would not happen. She said she had indeed been dragged into all this, but this was the outcome Sensei had already taken into consideration. Siri insisted that it was not her will. If Frieren was not satisfied, she was free to leave the operation, and of course Siri had no intention of forcing Fern to participate either. Even if Fern was a first-class mage, she remained her student before anything else. Frieren simply looked at her. Siri said that even if she did not ask for their combined strength, she already knew the assassination plot was little more than theater, even if the Empire gathered the full might of its entire military force. Siri asked Frieren whether she could picture a future in which she died. Frieren instead asked why Siri was trying to keep them out of the operation. Siri smiled and did not answer. Frieren called out to her again, curious about what kind of future Siri foresaw, what exactly her role was supposed to be there. Siri said there would be no harm to the operation even if she left. That matter belonged to the Continental Magic Association. She repeated that she had never intended to drag her into this. When the three of them came to the Imperial capital, Sensei simply chose them on her own. Frieren then put her on the spot, asking if she really believed that her pupil who reveres her would not drag her into this. Siri abruptly stood and called Sensei over so she could sit. Sensei protested, saying that even if she was free, she knew her own magical skills very well and was perfectly capable of handling something as simple as tying her own hair. Siri told her it was fine and motioned her forward. Sensei could not bring herself to resist and complied. She suddenly asked why Siri had chosen them, and Siri asked what she meant. Sensei said she was referring to the basis Siri had used to choose participants for the operation. Were there not more qualified people, such as Lernan? Siri looked confused at the mention of that name. She said it was impossible for Lernan to attend a ball like this, since he had been expelled from the palace. That had happened more than half a century ago. Sensei became curious about what he might have done. Siri added that he did not seem the type to waste his time. He left because he apparently had something in mind. A carriage was then shown outside, and there was Lernan, who greeted Denkan and Glock. He bowed and paid his respects to them. Back with Siri, she admitted she was not certain what kind of future lay ahead of them. While she fixed Sensei's hair, Sensei called out to her, making Siri realize she had drifted off topic. Siri said that her basis for choosing them was connected to whether Sensei remembered what she had requested for her privilege. The scene shifted to the moment Siri granted Sensei one wish. Sensei said of course she remembered, since there was never a moment in which she forgot it. Siri explained that at that time, she had lost hope. She believed that even with extraordinary talent, she might never reach the level of a powerful mage. Sensei fell silent at those words. Siri continued, saying the people participating in this operation were those who sought privileges far from the kind she wanted. Land had once wished for a spell that would allow him to locate the remains of his family, since he wanted to give them a proper burial. Yubel, believing the spell she originally wanted had most likely already been granted, searched for an alternative and wished for a spell that would help her locate her older sister. Fern, on the other hand, wished for a spell that would make laundry easier, prompting Siri to ask her if she was even thinking straight. Returning to the present, Sensei said it was all mysterious. There were talented people on both ends of the spectrum, those who longed for might and those who did not. The first would become mages in the ideal form Siri sought, while the latter would become mages who surpassed even her expectations. She recalled how Falsh once wished for a spell that would allow him to freely mimic another person's voice. When Siri asked him why, he answered that he would like to be able to imitate her voice, which creeped her out. Sensei, at that time, had wished for a spell that would let her sleep peacefully. She called Siri by her name and knelt before her. What she wanted was a spell that would allow her to fall asleep without disturbance even after taking someone's life. Back in the present, Siri said she wanted to witness an outcome that exceeded her expectations. Perhaps a future impossible for her to reach was a future they might grasp instead. When Sensei asked her to elaborate, Siri said she would not. If she explained it, she would only end up disagreeing with her decision. She was certain every mage there would act the same, which was why she had brought them. Hours later, the night arrived and it was finally time for the ball they were to attend. Guests had already gathered inside the hall, and Land and Yubel could be seen together on the opposite side. At the entrance, the mages entered all at once. Siri led the group, accompanied by Sensei, Frieren, Fern, Land, Yubel, Zine, and Falsh, all dressed in formal attire. They went straight to their table as the guests around them busied themselves with dancing. Sensei handed a glass of wine to Siri using her hair, and Siri thanked her. She also offered her some cake, which Siri accepted. At another table, Stark and Fern exchanged a glance while Frieren happily enjoyed the cake. Zine grew curious about whether it was really that good. Frieren asked Fern why she was not eating and said Zine could taste it first to check if it was poisoned, so there was no need to worry. Zine said he would just use a detection spell. Fern admitted that the atmosphere felt completely different from what she had braced herself for. Even Stark had mentally prepared himself to be thrown into a death trap. Frieren asked what he meant, and replied that this is the death trap, but he clarified that he meant it did not look like one at all. As Fern wiped Frieren's mouth, she told them they should wait for the enemy to make the first move. For Frieren, that was a solid plan. They had a roster on hand, which meant they could identify their targets freely. They were free to act at any moment and test anything if necessary, and being on the defensive gave them access to intel they might have overlooked. The plan was to stay calm and steady. She recalled when Sensei had served as an exam proctor and thought that was likely the reason she had been put in charge of this mission. While standing, Frieren said that she had been thinking since earlier that if they knew what their enemies looked like, why not strike first? Frieren told her she sounded just like Siri. According to her, that would be a good idea if the enemy were hiding behind them. However, based on Falsh's analysis, the opponents were still in the ballroom. That meant they were not yet in a position to move. They knew who the Shadow Warriors were, but no one else did. The magic special forces were certain to operate there, and they could be seen quietly monitoring the area. Frieren added that the Foundation Day Festival Ball was a symbol of peace, and if the Continental Magic Association were to spark conflict there, it could ignite an all-out war. So instead of taking the bait, it was better to enjoy the cake and conserve their strength. She looked at Frieren and said that if she was having trouble relaxing, they could always dance. It would make them appear less on guard. Frieren then invited Stark to dance, who asked whether she thought it was not too bold. Stark stood and led her to the floor. Wanting to relax, the two of them danced while Frieren and Zine sat at the table. Sensei fed Siri a slice of cake. Nearby, the magic special forces kept watch, and one of them called to his companion, Grau, pointing out that the mages seemed to be enjoying the ball. Grau replied that they were totally being watched, and he meant Sensei, who remained alert even as she fed Siri. Accidentally making eye contact with her, he panicked and waved, and she returned the gesture with a warning, sliding her hand across her neck in a cutting motion. The man said he had not wanted to be stuck on guard duty there. Still, he wondered why they had been summoned. Grau told him not to lose heart. They were supposed to be on standby in case an attack happened, though hopefully nothing would occur. Lager wondered about this supposed attack and asked who would be foolish enough to attack the Continental Magic Association. Grau said he knew someone in their ranks foolish enough to do exactly that. Lager thought he should start writing his will, though he admitted he did not want to die yet, and Grau commented that none of that was even funny. The scene shifted to Frey's office, where Kanona stood with her. Kanona reported that based on their investigation, they had discovered that all official records of the Shadow Warrior members had disappeared when the unit was disbanded 16 years ago. Frey's replied that she already knew, which was why she had ordered her to investigate the matter thoroughly and in detail. Kanona said they had conducted an exhaustive search, yet not a single trace remained. It was as if the Shadow Warriors had never existed at all. Frey's asked if she was implying that the official records had never existed in the first place and whether that was her conclusion. But Kanona did not answer. Frey's accepted that, saying it was at least logically sound. If only the Shadow Warriors had been more transparent, they would not have needed to be disbanded. Kanona added that even if they identified former members, she expected that those individuals had already passed their roles on to a new generation. Frey's pointed out that they had neither a single face nor a single name to work with, and she asked if that would delay their ability to respond to security threats. Kanona said that depended on Frey's orders. If she commanded them to move, they would move. Frey's clarified that their operations would be limited to outside the ballroom. And Kanona stated that they would defend the ballroom with everything they had and would not allow anyone to cause trouble inside. Frey's accepted this and told her to provide status reports. She explained that they were currently monitoring the entire palace, but focusing primarily on the ballroom. However, because local nobles frequently arrived and departed, they had concluded it was unrealistic to prevent infiltration entirely. Therefore, they had narrowed their surveillance target to the Continental Magic Association and positioned themselves to respond immediately should anyone launch an attack. Frey's was surprised by her emphasis on acting immediately, and Kanona confirmed it. If Frey's issued an order to attack, they would move right away. Frey's agreed and instructed them to remain on standby for further orders. Back at the ball, at another table, the Shadow Warrior members Routine, Gazelle, Father Clematis, and Iris were already inside the ballroom. As they ate, Gazelle asked Clematis if he really thought it was fine for them to be out in the open like that, and Clematis replied that it was. The ballroom was the only place where they could afford to show themselves openly, because as long as they remained there, the Continental Magic Association would not dare launch an attack. If the association did such a thing, it would quite literally turn the Empire against them. Iris grew curious about the Magic Special Forces, wondering whether those soldiers did not consider them traitors or targets for elimination, but Clematis explained that it depended on Captain Frey's. At least, that was what he wanted to say, but the truth was that despite appearances, the captain was extremely loyal, and Clematis doubted she would allow the ballroom to become a war zone. After all, the ball was a symbol of peace and a display of the empire's enduring strength, and anything that attempted to tarnish it would be viewed as a sign that the empire was declining. If he were in that position, he would ensure that nothing happened inside the ballroom and would instead quietly remove any threat behind the scenes. And if the conflict remained unseen by the public, he believed certain people were just waiting to swoop in and reap the benefits. But for them, the Shadow Warriors, they had no intention of stepping into the spotlight, so every revelation and every clash would occur behind the curtains. Whether it ended with the Continental Magic Association, the Magic Special Forces, or the Shadow Warriors prevailing, the dance held that night would most likely conclude without any visible incident. Iris remarked that she did not want to even think about the conflict anymore, and Clematis answered that she should consider herself fortunate if she witnessed it. If they felt like dancing, he told them, this was the time to do it. It might very well be the first and last time former child soldiers like them could attend such a gathering, even if they survived. Iris thought about it and admitted it seemed fun. She looked at Routine and asked if she wanted to dance. Then she excitedly grabbed her hand, but Iris said she had only been joking. She told Clematis that they were there to fight, not to dance, so he should stop fooling around. Clematis insisted he was not joking, and Iris could not believe he was serious. She complained that she did not even know how to dance, and that all he had ever taught them was how to fight, which offended Clematis. He said he had taught them plenty of other things necessary for missions, so they only needed to observe those around them and imitate, just as they always had. They had undergone training for that. Even the idiot Gazelle, who used his knife like a fork and vice versa, was now holding them properly. Gazelle was offended and asked if he was picking a fight. Clematis looked at Iris and told her to copy him and observe the people around her. Iris argued that this was not what she had meant, but he insisted that it was. He admitted that he did not know how to dance either, just like all of them. Iris suddenly stood up in frustration, prompting Clematis to call her by name. She pressed her hand against the side of her ear as if listening carefully, glanced behind her, and said she had done exactly what he said and observed her surroundings. She walked away, saying she would just come back later and that it was her turn to patrol anyway. Clematis instructed Routine to accompany her, and Routine followed. She reminded Iris that none of them were allowed to move alone, and she pulled her along, saying she knew that before dragging her out with her. Gazelle remained at their table, focused on eating, while Clematis stayed beside him. He called out to him and said that even though he did not know much about table manners, at least he had a sound mind. Clematis replied that he already knew that. Gazelle then admitted he should not have said what he did earlier, which prompted Clematis to ask him if he thinks he's got it all figured out. Gazelle said he didn't just think so, he knew it. Ever since the day Clematis had rescued them from the battlefield far up north, it felt as though he had raised them himself. Clematis bluntly answered that he had only wanted capable pawns and nothing more. Outside the ballroom, Routine and Iris stepped into the hallway. Routine asked what Iris had heard, and Iris explained that despite what Clematis claimed, someone was approaching the ballroom who did not care in the slightest about what happened at the ball and was itching for a fight. Routine wondered if they were Ciri's bodyguards or someone from their list, and Iris admitted she still was not sure. Routine said that if that was the case, they would need visual confirmation before engaging in combat. Iris insisted they had to act, otherwise their mission would be in danger. Meanwhile, Yubel and Land walked along another corridor. Land asked whether Yubel needed him to put her on a leash and if she even had one, but she glanced back at him and said she was not sure. He should probably start looking for one. The scene then shifted to Captain Phrase visiting the Emperor. She knelt before him and offered her respects. The Emperor asked about the current state of the ball, and she replied that everything was proceeding smoothly. They had implemented thorough security measures, and their state guest, Mistress Ciri, was requesting an audience with His Majesty. The Emperor remarked on how Ciri had brought an excessive number of attendants, enough that he wondered whether he should respond in kind. Phrase answered that she believed asserting his authority was the proper response in such a situation, and that she would assign the Magic Special Forces to accompany His Majesty. The Emperor agreed, but told her there was no need to rush. That would help them appear more stately. Phrase replied that she would see to it. The Emperor then added one more thing. He asked Phrase whether she was forgetting to tell him something. She fell silent, thought for a moment, then answered that she was not. That was all she had to report. The emperor had not expected that answer. He said she had intentionally ensured that Dinkin would not be involved in this matter, which made him wonder what she was planning. He told her to stop being so suspicious, and that if she was plotting something, she should include him as well. Frey simply looked back at him. The emperor continued, saying that their plan with Dinkin was for him to meet the great mage Siri at that night's ball in order to establish an amicable treaty. But he wondered, what about her plan? What exactly was he supposed to do? Frey answered that he had nothing to worry about. It was only her, his foolish retainer, acting on her own and against his orders. He told her to share what was on her mind, but Frey apologized for her rudeness. If he wished to take her life, she begged him to wait until everything was over. He was startled when she mentioned wanting her dead. That was insolent. If he had known a way to erase her completely, and without fail, he said he would have sent her to the gallows a long time ago. He added that she did not need to shoulder the responsibility for their once prosperous empire alone. The emperor admitted that he himself had looked away until now, but he fully understood how he and Dinkin, so different in nature, had together kept their nation safe. And just as he had rewarded Dinkin, he wished to honor her as well. Captain Frey stood and turned away from him, suggesting that he continue ignoring matters as he always had. Beyond that, she said she disagreed with him. Their empire held over 1,000 years of history, and it would continue, until the day came when every person in the world could use magic. She left, and the emperor was left pondering her declaration that the empire would endure. He knew no one understood the empire's current state better than Frey, and yet that was what she believed. It was truly baffling to him. When something has existed for as long as anyone can remember, it becomes difficult to imagine that it might end. Yet in truth, nothing in this world lasts forever. Even their great empire, which had stood for over a millennium, would not be an exception. Returning to Land and Yubel, the two continued walking when Land called out to her. But before he could even explain, Yubel immediately replied nope to everything. Land then asked if she had any idea what she was getting into. Yubel thought for a moment and said that if they were to start a fight inside the ball, the magic special forces would certainly intervene and it would ignite an all-out war. In other words, they could not take action as long as the Shadow Warriors were present. That was why Sensei preferred a wait-and-see approach. But in truth, she said it was a bad move for them. It felt as though they were asking to be cornered, whether they stayed inside the hall or not. Unless they forced their opponents to act, the Shadow Warriors' plan would proceed without a single hitch. Choosing to wait was essentially the same as choosing not to interfere, and by the time their enemies finally moved, it would already be too late. She felt as though they were being led into a dangerous trap. She added that she could smell the scent of death lingering in the air. They continued patrolling, and Land admitted he understood her point, and he couldn't say he disagreed either. But that did not give her an excuse to stir up a scene. As she had mentioned earlier, their current strategy might indeed ruin the Shadow Warriors' plan, but it was also the perfect recipe for a dogfight. Many people, including her, could end up dead. That was why, he said, he had been offering her alternative approaches from the beginning. Yet she refused every single one of them. He asked if she had some kind of death wish. Yubel answered that she simply didn't want him dying. But Land insisted that the options he was suggesting were precisely so he wouldn't have to die in the crossfire. Anyway, they just needed to stay calm and talk everything through properly. Something then caught Yubel's attention, and she called Land, referring to him as Four Eyes. She walked up to a soldier statue on display and urged him to look. Land glanced over. Yubel pointed out that those were all real swords. Wasn't this supposed to be a palace? And yet they simply left dangerous weapons lying around like that. Land reasoned that they probably had more weapons elsewhere that they simply hadn't noticed yet. He took her hand as she reached out, touched the blade's edge, and lifted it. Yubel asked what he was doing, and he told her to stop because it looked painful. But she answered that she was just checking whether the blade had an edge. Suddenly, they heard a door open. While Land was still holding her hand, Routine stepped out, but she did not proceed inside. She simply excused herself, told them to pay her no mind, and closed the door. Once she left, Land asked how many, and Yubel, licking the blood from her fingertip, answered that there were 2. On the other side of the door, Routine fell silent before saying that she now had visual confirmation of the targets. They matched the ones on their list. Routine pointed toward the door, and Iris responded with an okay sign. Because of that, Routine tore apart the dress she was wearing, while Iris pulled out a long needle. However, before they could move, Yubel had already sliced the door apart using her ability. Routine was thrown back as she dodged, pieces of the cut structure scattering everywhere. She could not believe they were the ones who struck first. She wondered why they would do that. Through the smoke, the figures of Land and Yubel appeared, and Yubel was even smiling. Routine grew uneasy at the thought that they had been recognized so quickly. If that were the case, they would need to force them to reveal how they had learned about them. Iris swiftly leaped behind Yubel, wrapping an arm around her shoulders and pressing the needle toward her neck, while Routine targeted Land. Meanwhile, Kanona returned to Captain Phrase to report that she had detected combat and was now waiting for her command. The captain turned toward her. Back inside the ballroom, Fern and Stark continued dancing, though both remained alert and observant. Fern guided Stark on where to move, and he followed her lead. From their position, she was able to watch their enemies. Those enemies were the Shadow Warriors. They spotted Clematis, Wolf, the still drunken Shrit, and Gazelle, who had already stood up. And just as Stark suspected, even if they did not count the two who had left earlier, which were Routine and Iris, 3 were still missing. Fern asked if those missing ones were Kryce, Valross, and Lore. Stark wondered if she truly believed Lore was there, but Fern was not certain. She remarked that she had beaten Lore so badly she nearly died. Stark was frightened by that statement. The two then stopped dancing and returned to their companions. Fern reported to Frieren as she was finished eating. She responded that their enemies were now on the move, which meant they would need to take action soon as well. Sensei instructed her that once they met with Falsh, they should follow his directions. She added that a battle would unfold behind the scenes. Siri then said it was time. She had learned that Land and Yubel were leading the assault. She admitted she had not asked Sensei why she had allowed them to conduct the raid. Her answer was that she doubted Yubel understood why, but that the two of them held the greatest advantage against warriors. Just like her. Siri found that remarkable. Now, she said, all they can do now is pray that their enemies aren't more powerful than they anticipated. Sensei stood quietly beside her. Outside, the battle between Routine, Iris, Land, and Yubel had already begun. Since Iris had been clinging onto Yubel, Land immediately moved to protect her and attacked. Iris had no choice but to release her hold and evade. Routine, on the other hand, failed to catch Land because Yubel shifted her attention toward Routine. Using Real Sidon, she sent a slicing attack in Routine's direction, forcing Routine to leap back in avoidance. Both sides stayed fully alert, watching each other's back closely and ready for combat. Routine positioned herself beside a pillar, placing the two pairs on opposite sides of the walkway. Land kept his eyes on Iris, while Yubel focused on Routine. Iris did not waste the opportunity and prepared to throw her large needles with immense force toward the unsuspecting Yubel. However, Land stepped in without hesitation and took the hit, raising his arm to block the sharp weapons. Iris did not expect him to stop them that way. Meanwhile, Routine leapt into the air and attempted to deliver a flying kick to Land. But Yubel reacted instantly. She pushed Land, dashing forward with her tongue out and her staff aimed straight at Routine. Routine managed to grab the staff, allowing the blow to land only on a nearby pillar. The pillar shattered into pieces, while Routine nimbly jumped back to avoid the follow-up attacks. Land pulled the embedded needles from his arm while keeping Iris in his sight, who now sat perched on the railing of the second floor. Routine hid behind a pillar again, while Yubel searched for her with clear excitement, eager for the fight to continue. Kanona once again reported the detected battle to Captain Phrase. She explained that they could isolate the area using an anti-perception barrier, but then immediately retracted the idea, saying never mind. It seemed there was no longer any need to do so. Meanwhile, inside, one of the guests reached for the door, intending to step out, but suddenly froze in shock. He asked his companion why he had even come over to that spot. The door had vanished right in front of them, and standing off to the side was Falsh, who had concealed the entire area with his ability. Clematis did the same. Even while seated inside the ballroom, he quietly monitored the situation with a book in hand. According to Captain Phrase, despite the battle already beginning, both the Shadow Warriors and the Continental Magic Association acted simultaneously to conceal it. Even in such an unexpected scenario, they were able to move without hesitation. Their opponents were indeed highly capable. Back at the battlefield, Routine rose from behind the pillar and spoke to Father Clematis. She apologized and reported that they were already engaged in combat. But before she could explain further, he answered that he already understood the situation. He said he would be taking the lead this time, and that he had been listening from the very beginning. With that, Routine asked permission to engage. Returning to Kanona, she informed Captain Phrase that they now had an opportunity to capture the Shadow Warriors. All they needed was her command. But Captain Phrase replied that for now, they would continue to observe and monitor the situation. Meanwhile, Clematis declared that they no longer had a choice. Captain Phrase had ordered the Magic Special Forces to stand by, while Clematis issued his own order to Routine and told her to charge forward and fight. Now that she had permission, she wasted no time and burst out from her position to confront Yubel. However, Yubel immediately swung her staff, forcing Routine to leap aside. Routine landed atop the head of a decorative soldier statue as Yubel continued her relentless assault. But Routine noticed something in those attacks. She reached for the soldier's shield and sword, snatching both weapons. With them, she managed to block Yubel's next strike and protect herself. Yubel, amused, admitted she was impressed. Routine, meanwhile, confirmed her suspicion. Yubel could slice through walls and ceilings, but she could not cut through armor. She still did not understand the nature of Yubel's magic, but with a shield, she could defend against it. Lost in her analysis, she failed to notice that Yubel had already struck her in the shoulder. Yubel remarked that she could feel Routine trying to analyze her. Routine, in her thoughts, realized that she truly could not predict Yubel's movements. Yet Yubel had still managed to slip past her guard. According to Yubel, they were a bad matchup for each other, and the fight was becoming even more enjoyable. Switching over to Land's battle, he used the same needle that had pierced him earlier to counter Iris. Iris sprinted swiftly along the balcony railing while Land targeted her from below. In her thoughts, she questioned what kind of attack this was supposed to be. Why was he using her needles without permission? She could tell he wasn't the type of mage compatible with her style. He fought in an underhanded way, exploiting the weakness of their Zoltrak resistance. And beyond that, poisons had no effect on him. Most of all, they both reacted far faster than the average mage. She needed to understand why. If she didn't, she would surely lose this fight. She spared a glance toward Yubel and concluded that Yubel was the intuitive type, someone who could use magic without consciously thinking through every step, which explained her incredible reaction speed. And Yubel continued to push Routine back without pause. Iris wondered what the explanation was for Land. She suspected he did not cast intuitively like Yubel, and poison had no effect on him either. As she continued dodging his attacks, she questioned the reason. He did not seem to have any natural resistance. After a moment, she reached a conclusion. That was not his real body. Land suddenly vaulted upward with incredible speed and grabbed her by the throat. He slammed her into the wall with such force that the window beside her shattered. Holding her by the neck, he glared at her coldly. "I see," Iris said. He was the total opposite of Yubel. He wasn't fast because he didn't think. He was so fast because thinking was all he did. Land replied that since she was not a mage, he expected his tactic would work on her. He hadn't expected her to realize that wasn't his real body. He thanked her, saying that now he no longer needed to pretend. Then he told her goodnight and triggered a spell that delivered a small electric shock, meant to temporarily paralyze her. However, Iris remained alert enough to counter. She stabbed him with a needle, which he blocked with his left arm. She apologized, explaining that no matter how much pain or suffering she endured, she remained fully conscious. Land kept his eyes locked on her even as she drove the needle into him. Iris questioned why when Land suddenly pulled back, disengaging. Iris immediately drew more needles from the underside of her wrist and hurled them as Land dropped back down. Land thought to himself that defensive magic was far too slow to use against her. Fortunately, he was the one fighting her, because otherwise, Yubel would surely have been dead by now. Still, he wondered what he should do next. Thanks to Falsha's intel, he knew poison didn't affect her, but her endurance exceeded his expectations. So this was what a Shadow Warrior truly was. At the rate things were going, the fight would become a war of attrition. And if it reached that point, he would have no chance of winning. He had another idea, but Iris called out to him, noting that he wasn't using his real body, so why was he protecting his neck? Land hadn't expected her to be that perceptive. Returning to Routine and Yubel, Routine used her sword to attack her, and Yubel barely managed to block with her staff. Even so, the force of the clash sent Yubel flying into a pillar, leaving her seated against it and momentarily cornered. Routine moved in, but she sliced through the pillar behind her to escape. Even for her, this was not looking good. She hadn't expected the warriors to be this fast. She could hardly keep her eyes fixed on them. But the real problem was the shield. It stood between her and her target. Sorganile required that the caster maintain a clear view of the target's entire body. She observed Routine and understood that, in her perception, anything worn counted as part of their body. That was how she interpreted it, and she had no doubt that Werbel saw it the same way. But when it came to shields, she saw them only as obstacles. She wondered how she was supposed to break through. She considered that she might be able to take Routine down if she was prepared to die with her, but she knew Four Eyes would not be happy with that idea. And if anyone could turn the tide of this battle, it would be him. She glanced at Land. Unlike her, his fights seemed to be going well, but she wondered why his movements are pretty easy to read. She could predict what he would do next simply by watching the flow of his mana. She looked back at Routine hiding behind her shield and realized she couldn't detect mana at all. She rushed at her again, and she retreated. She thought to herself that they relied entirely on their five senses, especially their vision. But unlike them, she could see everything. Routine charged her once more, and she backed away. She knew she needed to assess the timing. At the same moment, Routine herself was thinking hard, trying to figure out how to defeat her. Inside the ballroom, everything remained peaceful. The guards from the Magic Special Forces stood ready while Sensei quietly observed them. She remarked that the Magic Special Forces still had not taken action, and Siri thought they were most likely looking to fish in troubled waters. Such behavior, she believed, made them look cowardly. They possessed an entire unit of well-trained mages, yet continued to move with excessive caution. Sensei answered that this very cowardice was what made the Imperial mages frightening. Siri suddenly remembered that she had once fought the Magic Special Forces. Sensei mentioned 3 first-class mages were lost in that battle. That made Siri think of their captain, Phrase. She wished they had more time to observe them. She fell silent, deep in thought, until Sensei asked whether she believed they would be allowed to meet His Majesty. Siri took a moment before replying that they would see the Emperor whether they wished to or not. The Emperor may have been a cunning pragmatist, but he understood the importance of keeping up appearances. He would likely appear with an even larger entourage than theirs. When Sensei asked if she had met the Emperor before, Siri answered that she had once, in a prophetic dream. She had no intention of saying anything more about it. Sensei grew even more curious, but Siri insisted she had made her bet, and she was certain she would be angry with her, whether they succeeded or failed. The next scene revealed the prophetic dream she had mentioned, set in the palace. The Emperor walked down a hallway when Siri suddenly appeared behind him and asked if he could not sleep. He replied that he could hardly believe what was happening. He wondered what Phrase was doing and how she had allowed an intruder like her to enter, and Siri only smiled at him. He recognized her as Siri of the Continental Magic Association and said they would meet the next day at the ball. Surely there was nothing they needed to discuss that could not wait until tomorrow. Siri replied that he was mistaken. She did not have much time left, so they needed to speak immediately. The Emperor asked if they could talk while walking. Something had been weighing on his mind. Siri agreed, so long as he was not trying to derail their discussion. He answered that he cannot guarantee it won't happen, even if he does not care. Phrase, after all, would not simply stand by and do nothing. Siri reassured him that she would not interfere. Hearing that, the Emperor looked at her and murmured that he understood. She must have killed Phrase. In that case, he believed the result would depend on how she had been killed. To Phrase, even her own death would serve as a tool to buy time. Siri did not doubt that. Phrase had given her no time for anything except for this audience with His Majesty. She reflected on that battle, calling it truly enjoyable. And besides, she said, it was fine if Phrase overheard them, not in that place, at least. Her words made the Emperor curious, and he suddenly realized something. The scene shifted to a study room as the Emperor explained that they were inside a dream. That, he said, was how Siri had been able to force her way in. Hearing this, Siri asked how he had realized it. He answered that the magic item placed on the desk granted its user the ability to distinguish between dream and reality. Its flame changed color whenever one was inside a dream. The flame turning black meant that the dream did not belong to him. It belonged to Siri. Siri confirmed it, saying that he was merely a character inside her dream. She observed the magic item and recognized it, remembering it as one of Flam's silly little treasures. It surprised her that it still functioned even within a prophetic dream. Hearing that, the Emperor remarked that prophetic dreams were magic from mythical times. Perhaps it was a form of clairvoyance. He had never imagined such abilities were real. Siri questioned him about his mention of clairvoyance, and she said that it was not as fanciful as it sounded. She began to explain the nature of that magic, but abruptly stopped, deciding it was pointless to explain further to him. Better, she said, for him to simply think of it as clairvoyance. He then wondered aloud whether this encounter between them was something that would truly occur in the future. Siri told him that it was only one among many possibilities, merely a choice she happened to make in that moment. Nothing more, even if it turned out to be meaningless. She walked toward the balcony and reflected aloud that she had not expected such a strange flaw to exist, a character inside a dream who was aware of the dream. Because of that, the prophetic dream had lost its usefulness as a tool for predicting the future. She stepped onto the railing and said that this was her last chance, a waste, really. She was about to jump when he stopped her, and she looked at him in confusion, wondering why. He told her that if she had gone to all the trouble of appearing there, then he wanted to know what she truly wished to discuss. She had already mentioned that this was not the first time she attempted this, which only intrigued him further. He wanted to know how many times she had tried, and what would happen in the future. Siri was startled by his questions and asked why he wanted to know. He drew closer and spoke of the plan to assassinate her, Siri, the great mage, and how it was unfolding beyond the reach of his power. She simply stared at him while he continued, saying that in truth, he had never thought her death would be ideal. For the prosperity of the empire, no, for its peaceful decline, he wished to avoid it. He wanted them to discuss these matters. It would be beneficial to both sides. Siri then asked him if he meant that if she brought back the information she gained from him through this dream, then they could prevent the assassination attempt, and in doing so, the empire would profit in reality. Was that what he believed? The emperor admitted that it did not sound so bad. He asked her to explain her situation to him. Siri then wondered why she should do that. She was supposed to be the one receiving information from him, and the emperor replied that he could not help her unless he first understood her reasons. Siri stopped him there. It was obvious, she said, that this was not his true intention. He was simply trying to draw information for his own benefit. The emperor looked at her while she called him a real swindler. Siri added that he maintained consciousness, and her dream was connected to the emperor's. And in reality, Siri was simply seated on a couch while the emperor slept at his desk inside the study room. The emperor explained that the mental defense protecting him was created with the quintessence of their imperial magic. It was the culmination of 1,000 years of imperial research. He might have been the one casting the spell, but the magical principles behind it went far beyond what he could comprehend. It was highly likely that this defense was the reason for their current situation. If an emperor in a false world, within a prophetic dream, were able to release information without awareness, the empire could be placed in danger. He believed that the version of himself inside the dream existed specifically to choose which information could be shared. That statement caught Siri's attention. The emperor, she noted, didn't even hesitate to spell it all out. He answered that he was an emperor, after all. He understood that if the negotiations failed, the empire would collapse. That was reason enough. Siri cut him off and stepped down from where she sat. She told him that she had decided to trust him. She agreed that they would exchange information. The emperor was puzzled and asked why. He did not believe that what he said was enough to convince her. Siri replied that the emperor believes that the assassination plot would end in failure, and because of that, he decided to play it safe. If he were truly an accomplice to that plot, he would never act with such reckless ease. But his predictions, she said, have completely missed the mark. Her words surprised the emperor that he asked her again what awaited them in the future. Siri answered that she had no idea, but suddenly said that she would be dead. In the end, she could neither determine who killed her, nor how, nor what would follow her death. But she considered herself fortunate to have the chance to face him. In the real world, moments where she could speak freely without interruption were exceedingly rare. Now she could finally plan for whatever would come after her death. Whatever she chose to do from here on would surely be rejected by her foolish apprentices, as long as her ideas were founded on the belief that she had already died. Yet now, at last, she could have a meaningful conversation. And it was not a bad arrangement for the emperor either. She told him to allow both the Empire and the Continental Magic Association to pursue their mutual interests. They entered the room, and Siri suggested that they begin exchanging information. She would explain her situation to him. But before that, she needed to ask, just in case. She wanted to know whether the emperor's authority could be used to stop the assassination plot. He answered that it was no different from telling a baker to harvest the wheat himself. He asked if she understood how the empire had managed to survive for thousands of years. They built a system that would not collapse even if a fool like him ascended the throne. The separation of powers ensured that, no matter who the emperor was, the empire would continue functioning. This was not like the patchwork kingdoms scattered across the continent where a single king could claim absolute power. But his authority did not reach the shadows. That was when Siri realized that even as a hostage, he had no value at all. The emperor replied that this was a frighteningly cavalier statement, but it was the truth. Someone else would simply inherit the throne in his place. Even so, he still wanted to help her however he could. She might not believe it, but he was a man who cared. He also wanted to repay her for the kindness she had shown Denkan. But Siri answered that she had done nothing. She turned toward the window and told him they should return to the topic at hand. The magic that granted prophetic visions was a spell that allowed her to occasionally experience the future in the form of a dream. The timing and duration were random, and even the chance of it activating in the first place was extremely small. It went without saying that the spell never revealed anything beyond the moment of her death. It seemed that the spell was limited by the lifespan of the caster. For a very long time now, she had never seen any event past the night of the ball marking the end of the Foundation Day festival. That was when she would die, and the vision ended there. The emperor commented that such a spell was extremely inconvenient. Siri answered that every spell capable of showing the future came with limitations, and most were imperfect. Throughout the entire history of humankind, only a single person, a hero of the South, had succeeded in turning a prediction into perfect reality. What people called clairvoyance was nowhere near the real thing. It was simply an attempt to create the most accurate prediction possible by combining a variety of spells. When the emperor asked if that was what she had been doing, she answered no. That prophetic dream spell was the only one she had left. She never wanted to use clairvoyance as a tool in the first place. But because so many mages desired it, those spells were granted as special privileges, starting from the most effective ones. She remarked that it was funny. Now that the exact length of her life was guaranteed, the inconsistency that once rendered her prophetic dreams useless was no longer a problem. It had become a practical spell. The emperor then asked whether she could ask those mages for help. But Siri answered that all of them were already dead. Mages connected to clairvoyance were easy to kill. It could be because those who could see the future grew arrogant, or because they were targeted by another clairvoyant. And based on the circumstances, the latter was far more likely. Their enemy possessed a kind of magic that allowed them to foresee the future. Her only hope was that their ability was just as imperfect as her own. At the ball the next day, at the sound of the bell, that would be her end. She would be attacked from a blind spot, directly at her throat. It would all be over in an instant. She could not see even the faintest glimpse of the attacker. And because she could not sense any mana, the enemy might be a warrior or someone whose skill far exceeded what should exist in that era. Still, the outcome never changed, regardless of where she went. The result remained the same even if she avoided the ball or chose not to go to the imperial capital. The emperor understood then why she believed their enemy possessed clairvoyance. But Siri said that was not the only reason. Even though she despised the idea of running away like a coward, she still tried. Simulacra, illusions, barriers, she used every possible tool to escape death. And in that scenario, no one attempted to kill her. She survived, but it led to a far more devastating tragedy. Many mages of the Continental Magic Association died in her place. There were always casualties in every possible future, but that one had a completely different scale, far worse. She admitted that the Continental Magic Association had grown too large. Many of its members carried important responsibilities in cities and even in rural settlements, and she could not protect all of them. The Emperor then remarked that their enemies were using them as hostages. And in Ciri's view, it seemed the enemy was eager to dance with her at the ball. That was their special way of telling her to surrender her life. Without clairvoyance, they would never be able to deliver such an elaborate threat. She asked the Emperor if he could think of anyone capable of using that kind of magic. He answered that only Phrase came to mind, but he could not imagine such a spell coming from her. If Phrase truly had the ability to see the future, she would never have allowed the Empire to fall so far. Perhaps, Ciri replied. Besides, spells related to clairvoyance were extremely few in number, and most of them had been passed down through a clan that was wiped out during the wars in the southern lands. And everything about Phrase indicated she was from the north. She could not imagine that such a spell originated from that clan. Either way, it was time for them to think about the endgame. They needed to find a way to reduce casualties on both sides. The Emperor reflected for a moment, then said that yes, he now understood the entire situation. He then asked Ciri what kind of information she wished to obtain. The prophetic dream scene finally ended, and the story returned to the present. The dancing at the ball continued without interruption, and the Emperor finally arrived at the gathering, accompanied by 8 men walking behind him. When Ciri saw them enter, she commented that now that they were here, he really was showing off. The scene then moved underground. Valros and Kreis were patrolling together, fully equipped and carrying their weapons. Meanwhile, Falsch was also stationed there alone, keeping watch. He began to feel anxious the moment he noticed their arrival. Valros headed straight for the staircase flooded with water and stripped down before dipping himself in. He sat there completely at ease, clearly relaxed. Kreis, however, couldn't believe what he was seeing. He pointed out that the water was melted snow. He was worried for Valros, saying he could die if he stayed there any longer. But Valros simply replied that he had already gone swimming in it. Kreis sat nearby and said he understood, which was exactly why he was concerned. He urged Valros to hurry up and get out of the water. Valros finally climbed out. Kreis then gathered pieces of wood and piled them together to make a fire. Honestly, Kreis said, Clematis always forced them to do the riskiest things. But Valros replied that he had no choice. It seemed people down there recognized his face. Kreis asked if he really believed that. He pointed out that the statues and portraits honoring his achievements had been destroyed long ago. As he lit the firewood, he added that no one remembered him anymore. Valros silently dressed himself. Kreis added that no one recognized him anymore, even though he had once been the hero of that very nation. Valros told him not to worry about that. They stayed there for a moment while Kreis warmed himself by the fire. A few moments later, Valros was fully geared up again, and Kreis called out to him, asking why he didn't warm himself by the fire for a bit. But as Valros fastened his helmet, he declined, saying he didn't need it. It was time to go, so they left the place and continued making their way through the underground passage. Walking behind him, Kreis mentioned that he thought about it often. Valros's body was unbelievably tough. He asked what his body was even made of. Valros replied that it was normal for a warrior, but Kreis insisted it definitely wasn't. Valros looked back at him and admitted that yes, perhaps he was right. Kreis said he always called things normal, repeating it so often, and Valros replied that it had become a habit he picked up from an old friend. Till the day he met that friend, he never once doubted that he was the strongest warrior. But that friend taught him that a warrior's pride and fearlessness in the face of death could become fatal weaknesses in battle. And the friend he was referring to was Eisen. Thanks to that man, Valros had survived for so long. He recalled how many times he had already stared death in the eye, so many that he could no longer count them. Like the time he went face to face with the bloody god of war Rivali. Yet every single time, his friend's words would calm him. That was why he always told himself it was normal. That was what he repeated to himself again and again. But Kreis wasn't convinced. They had known each other for a long time, and to him, it felt like Valros was always on the lookout for a place to die, somewhere he could meet an honorable death befitting a warrior. Valros fell silent before answering that they actually hadn't known each other that long. But Christ corrected him, saying it had already been 8 years. That made Valros pause, and he admitted that if that was how Christ saw him, then perhaps it was true. And, just as he said, that was exactly what he kept telling himself. Even so, he couldn't help but think that if there was ever a warrior capable of killing him, one of them would be his friend, the friend he believed to be the strongest warrior. That was how he saw it, at least. Still, time was cruel. They were both old men now. Suddenly, Valros asked if he had ever met Luva. Christ asked if he meant the commander. He said Clementis had introduced Luva to him once, and that he was incredibly skilled. Valros was surprised to hear Christ describe him that way. That word alone, he said, couldn't even begin to cover his ability. He remembered the moment Clementis introduced Luva to him. He had been staring downward the entire time while Valros silently observed him. He said he was afraid of him, something Christ did not expect to hear. Then the warrior, who by rank was supposed to stand above him, said something he found unbelievable, that he was willing to be nothing more than a simple pawn. It made him wonder just what kind of enemies they would be facing. While they continued walking, Falsh was shown hidden behind a pillar, quietly watching them. He stayed completely still, not daring to move. It was clear from his expression that he was deeply unsettled by the thought of what kind of enemies they were dealing with. The first time he had seen that man, he had mistaken him for a demon general. It made him wonder just how many people Valros had already killed. He was starting to act more like a monster than anything else. Someone like him shouldn't be able to fool the magic special forces and simply walk straight in through the front gate. It finally made sense to him why they had entered through that route instead. That passageway had been an escape route dating all the way back to the age of the Unified Empire. He had learned about it from an old blueprint he found in Mistress Series' collection. Securing that location had been the correct decision. The last time he was down there and saw the rest of the Shadow Warriors, there were no posters or solid proof of their identities yet, which meant he couldn't act or pursue them. His suspicion back then was that their objective had been reconnaissance, but never did he imagine they would send a monster like that. Even so, the information he gained from the risk was worth it. Now he finally understood that the only one missing from the wanted posters was the commander of the Shadow Warriors, the one they called Luva. And if he remembered correctly, the Governor-General of the Lorbeer domain, far to the north, was also named Luva. And looking at the roster of Imperial officers that Lineal had obtained, that man was listed as an outsider who earned his reputation through covert operations in the southern lands. Just thinking about the southern territories gave him an uneasy feeling. He had a very bad feeling about this. Valros and Christ walked past his hiding spot, and Falsh thought to himself that he needed to get back immediately to meet up with Frieren and the others so they could all take these enemies down together. He could not allow that thing to reach the palace. A moment later, Valros suddenly said he could hear someone breathing. Falsh froze and held his breath. Christ, however, confidently said it was definitely just Wolf. Wolf supposedly loved sulking in the shadows. That had been Valros's assumption at first as well. But now, their heartbeat had suddenly sped up, which meant it was an enemy. Falsh prepared himself to hide, but Valros warned him not to do anything stupid. He said that if he moved, he would kill him. Falsh hesitated, torn between options, but he had no choice except to use his shadow magic to hide himself. However, before he could finish, his right arm was suddenly severed and sent flying into the air. As it hit the ground, Valros appeared right in front of him. He reminded him that he had already warned him not to move. He pressed his weapon against Falsh's neck and said that the next thing he would cut would be his head. Falsh, shaken yet trying to keep his composure, said he was surprised Valros was even allowing him a next time. He was far more reasonable than he had expected, and in a way, a relief. The scene shifted to Luva just as his right-hand man approached him. He told him that he understood. Everything was unfolding exactly as they had planned. Yubel was still fighting routine, Land was clashing with Iris, and Falsh was facing Valros underground. Meanwhile, Frieren, Fern, Stark, and Zine had already stepped out of the ballroom to prepare. Luva remarked that it was surprising how eerily quiet the place was. The old man behind him then asked if he was watching the evening star. Still gazing upward, Luva answered yes. It reminded him of the southern lands, his homeland. The two of them used to stare at the night sky together almost every evening. He fell silent for a moment, lost in thought. A few seconds later, the old man softly called his name, Held. He told him he didn't need to bear everything on his own. He said he had failed him as his master. But he didn't get to finish his sentence before Luva, or Held, told him it wasn't true. Luva paused, then asked him not to call him by that name. His master then asked if Luva truly understood their situation. This might be the last time. But Luva replied that that was exactly the reason. He was Luva, Governor General of the Lorbeer domain, and the old man was one of the servants. Neither their identities, their achievements, will ever be recorded in history. He bowed his head and placed a hand on his sword. As he lifted his right hand, he said that, in truth, what was about to happen could hardly even be called an achievement. Humans and demons alike would lose their mana, and magic itself would disappear. The laws of the world, rewritten during the Age of Legends, would simply revert to their original form. That is all there is to it. Magic, Luva continued, had been the root of every tragedy in his life. One of his earliest memories was his first encounter with magic, the moment his older brother died protecting him from a stray spell. Arrows of light had rained from the sky, and a single hit ended his brother's life instantly. The southern lands where Held had been born were far beyond the reach of demons, and because of that, no matter how ridiculous it sounded, they had become a place where humans shed the blood of fellow humans. When he lost his brother, he realized that magic was nothing more than a weapon, and that dying in the middle of an exchange of spells during a street fight was not unusual at all. It was something that could happen to anyone. That madness had defined his homeland. A few years after that incident, the second time he experienced magic became a memory carved so deeply into his being that it never faded. In a single night, his entire town vanished. Nothing remained but rubble. He was left with absolutely nothing, not even the bodies of his parents. But in truth, he understood from the way the adults spoke that bodies had been found. They simply could not allow children to see something so horrifying. Yet what truly shocked him was realizing that the hell he witnessed was nothing but collateral damage. The magic being used for war in the southern lands was no longer under human control. He felt his strength leave his body, unable to believe what he was seeing. There was nothing he could do but stand there and stare. He no longer knew if he had been standing there for hours or for days. He remembered adults attempting, again and again, to speak to him, to lead him away, to help him move, but he stubbornly refused to take a single step. In the end, they left him, and he was enveloped in silence. He couldn't recall what prompted him to look up, but when he did, he noticed a fallen statue of Himmel the hero. The sight captured his attention. It summoned back the stories his parents used to tell him. Tales of Himmel, a great hero, the kind of figure any child would admire. He too had wanted to be like him. So when he saw the statue toppled over, he felt compelled to try and lift it back up. He knew it was pointless. But even so, that statue, no, that hero who had once brought peace to the world, did not deserve to lie helpless in a place like that. It was truly a meaningless act. It would never change anything. But he still continued. After all, the Himmel from those stories would never simply stand and do nothing when faced with a tragedy like that. While he was struggling to lift it, he noticed someone approaching. The man told him to let him help. That was the moment he met the man who would later become his master. It was just a coincidence, but it was that fallen statue of the great hero that brought them to the same place. With his help, they managed to raise the collapsed statue of Himmel. He handed the boy water and asked if he also admired the hero Himmel. He admitted that Himmel was the one who inspired him to become a warrior and protect that land. The man then paused, realizing something, and apologized for arriving too late. But he said he would not ask for his forgiveness. He had every right to blame him. Young Luva, or Held, glanced up at him, thinking carefully, before responding that he had been in a faraway place, doing his best to protect other people. If that was the case, then he had done nothing wrong. But the man replied that that was not something a child should be saying. Even so, he recognized the man instantly. He was his dad's friend. He had seen him a few times before. That was why he understood that the pain he carried, the regret of not being able to help, and the frustration. He knew he felt all of those things as well. The man never expected to hear something like that from him. A child should not have to carry everything the way he did. The name of that man was Lehrer. It would be a long time before he learned that he was considered the strongest warrior of the southern lands. He had survived countless battles and had been praised for emerging victorious in every one of them. But even then, He could feel the heavy irony of it all. In a land ravaged endlessly by war, the only thing it took to defeat an invincible warrior was simply his absence. No matter how powerful one person was, the truth remained. They were still only a single individual. Even so, Lerer's eyes continued to shine with an unshakable determination, as though there was something within him he would never let go of. Eventually, the two of them stood and walked away, with young Luva following behind him. Lerer said that the place felt like hell. There was a time when he believed that if he simply kept fighting, someday, a great hero would appear and bring peace to the southern lands. But one could not simply wait for someone else to save them. No one ever appeared like that. If he truly wanted peace, he had to act on his own to make it happen. That, too, was something Himmel would have done. Thinking about it now, he realized that perhaps that fallen statue and the story of the hero who never gave up were what rekindled Lerer's determination.